Chapter 1884. The river god coldly replied, "I know this, but I've already made my decision. Just follow my orders and don't try to persuade me. I won't change my mind." Seeing this, everyone could only obey and no longer try to persuade the river god. The river god gave a series of orders, and everyone received them before turning and leaving the god palace. Seeing everyone leave, the woman smiled and leaned towards the river god as she said, "That man from last night was from the Pantheon Palace, right? What kind of person was he to be able to subdue our beautiful river god?" Thinking about it, the river god felt quite angry. He was the Pantheon Palace's god lord. He was very domineering and had terrifying power. Back then, I was controlled by him without being able to resist at all, and that bastard used those despicable methods to deal with me. The woman was quite shocked. She had never thought that the Pantheon Palace's god lord would come to their faction. Now, everyone was filled with curiosity and fear towards this god lord who had suddenly appeared. Just what kind of person was he? He had established Pantheon Palace by himself and had rapidly taken down many godly spirit factions, causing Pantheon Palace to become one of the most powerful factions in this region. From this, it could be seen that this person was incredibly terrifying and mysterious. No one knew who he was and only knew that he had suddenly appeared here. The woman was also quite curious about Zhao Fu and smiled as she said, "River God, tell me in detail what happened last night." The river god's face became slightly red, and he lightly nodded as he told her what had happened last night. After hearing what had happened, the woman smiled as she said, "This Pantheon Palace's god lord is quite charming. I'm starting to like him." The river god looked at her with a trace of anger as he said, "What's there to like about this kind of man? I hate people like him to death." The woman giggled as she said, "I don't think so. River god, it seems like you're starting to like him." The river god lightly harumphed as he said with certainty, "I'm not." However, after saying this, her face became even redder. The woman smiled and did not continue asking as she said, "I think that joining the Pantheon Palace is indeed the best choice. With how terrifying that Pantheon Palace's god lord is, the Pantheon Palace will become the most powerful faction here sooner or later." Hearing this, the river god gave a trace of smile as he said, "I had a feeling about this, or else I wouldn't have submitted to him so easily." The woman continued to smile as she said, "Lord River God, then when we go to the River God Palace, bring me along. I also want to see him. When the time comes, we can serve him together." The river god glared at the woman with a blushing face. The ugly fatty got off the bed, put on his clothes, opened the door, and came outside as he said coldly, "Pass down my orders. Gather all the generals and city lords." The guard acknowledged the order and quickly left to convey the order of the ugly fatty. After that, the ugly fatty sat in the divine temple, waiting for the people from all sides to arrive. After everyone had arrived, the ugly fatty said, "I now announce that the faction has submitted to the Pantheon Temple. From now on, everyone will be a member of the Pantheon Temple." Everyone was dumbfounded, unable to react. They had never expected the ugly fatty to say something like that. Did he not throw away the Pantheon Temple's gift yesterday and even tell the Pantheon Temple's people scram? Why did you change your allegiance to Pantheon today? Most people did not have any objections, nor did they dare to have any objections. The faction belonged to the ugly fatty, and they had to abide by his decisions. Moreover, the ugly fatty was quite ferocious. If you did not listen to his orders, you might be chopped into meat paste and fed to the wolf venom flowers. Normally, no one dared to go against his words. "I don't agree." A beautiful woman with a fiery figure and wearing a red dress said rudely as she walked in with a group of people. Seeing this person, the generals did not dare to say anything and obediently retreated to the side. This was because the person who had come was the ugly fatty's wife, the daughter of a godly spirit from a large faction. That faction was the faction that the ugly fatty had submitted to. The ugly fatty was now under Zhao Fu's control, and Zhao Fu frowned. Because he had obtained the ugly fatty's memories, Zhao Fu understood this person's identity. The woman's beautiful eyes looked at the ugly fatty with disgust, and she said with a trace of arrogance, "If I really didn't come, an ugly pig like you would really think you're the leader of this faction. Don't you know that this faction belongs to the Earth God? As the Earth God's daughter, I'm the leader of this faction. Also, since you gave the order to submit to Pantheon, you're betraying the Earth God. Get down here and kowtow, and I'll spare your pig life." The group of people behind her also stared coldly at the ugly fatty, not at all polite. Everyone else obediently stood by the side, not daring to say anything. Hearing the woman's words, Zhao Fu, who was controlling the ugly fatty, could not help but feel angry as he said, "What if I say no?" The woman coldly harumphed, "You're seeking death. Back then, I married you for your divinity, and now I'm going to take your divinity in advance." The woman stretched out her hand, and a flower mark appeared on her palm, and a wave of power flowed towards the ugly fatty. This was the power that could control the ugly fatty's soul, and without this mark, the woman would not have dared to speak like she had before. The power flowed towards the ugly fatty, but the ugly fatty was completely fine. This caused the woman to feel quite startled, and she hurriedly tried a few more times. She sent out a few more waves of power, but they were completely useless against the ugly fatty. A stunned expression appeared on the woman's face. This was because the ugly fatty's soul had long since disappeared, and it was now Zhao Fu who was controlling the body. The ugly fatty savagely grinned. The woman felt quite startled and hurriedly said to the people behind her, "Hurry and protect her and escape from here." The people behind her understood that something was off, and they immediately protected the woman and prepared to leave. The ugly fatty stretched out a hand, and a massive wave of power flowed out, grabbing those people's heads and clenching his fist. Bang! 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 One by one, their heads exploded, causing blood and brain matter to splatter everywhere. The smell of blood spread out. The others were so frightened that they did not dare to say anything. The woman's body was covered with a lot of blood, and she looked quite terrified as she said, "You can't kill me. My mother is the Earth God." The ugly fatty coldly laughed as he said, "I won't kill you. After destroying your faction, I'll make your mother and your sisters kneel before me and serve me, and then I'll properly teach you a lesson." Chapter 1885. Aha, who am I? Who do you think I am? Zhao Fu did not bother hiding his tone and looked at the woman as he said arrogantly and domineeringly. Facing Zhao Fu's powerful aura, the woman's face became pale, and she quickly thought. She suddenly understood and said coldly, "You're from the Pantheon Palace, which is why you controlled that ugly pig to join the Pantheon Palace." Zhao Fu loudly laughed as he said, "That's right. Not only am I from the Pantheon Palace, but I'm also their god lord." The woman coldly laughed as she pointed at Zhao Fu and said to the people around her, "Did you hear that? He's no longer that ugly pig. He's the Pantheon Palace's god lord, and you still have to kill him." Everyone looked at Zhao Fu and hesitated, wondering if they should listen to the woman's words. The woman continued to call out, "He's already controlled that ugly pig, and there's no saving it. If you kill him, I'll heavily reward you in the future." Hearing this, some people could not help but want to attack. After all, Zhao Fu had controlled their god lord, so he was their enemy. Boom! A terrifying aura exploded out from the ugly fatty's body and flooded out like a flood, covering everything in the surroundings. The surrounding air seemed to freeze, and everyone present felt as if they had fallen into an abyss, causing their souls to feel terror. "Kneel! Submit to me." Zhao Fu's domineering voice sounded out, and everyone knelt on the ground in fear, their bodies trembling. Facing this power, they did not have any courage to resist. The woman also felt terror and knelt on the ground, her body continuously trembling as she pleaded, "Don't kill me. I can properly serve you now." Zhao Fu controlled the ugly fatty's body and walked down from above. He lifted the woman's chin and said domineeringly, "I said that I wouldn't kill you, and I'll properly experience being served by you, your mother, and your sisters. Also, I'm not a fatty, so it's best if you speak politely." The woman was so afraid that tears welled up in her eyes as she hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, yes, I understand. Lord God, Lord will definitely properly serve you." Zhao Fu sneered, and a huge amount of demonic qi poured into the woman's body, controlling her body. Then, Zhao Fu turned to the people kneeling on the ground. With a wave of his hand, streams of light shot into their bodies. "Now listen to my orders. Don't leak this matter." "Yes, we understand." They didn't dare to hesitate or refuse Zhao Fu. Hearing this, Zhao Fu's lips curled up into a smile. "Lord God, before I came here, I sent someone to report the news to my mother. Maybe she will be here soon. I'm sorry, God Master. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. If I had known that I would submit to Sir God Master, I would have served Sir God Master well and wouldn't have called my mother over." Sensing that the aura had taken control of her body, the woman looked quite afraid as she spoke nervously. She was afraid that if her mother suddenly came here, Zhao Fu would immediately kill her. Zhao Fu, however, did not seem to mind. He laughed and said, "She came to walk into the trap, which is exactly what I wanted." Boom! As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying godly aura burst out from the sky, forming a terrifying might that covered the entire area. Zhao Fu had a trace of arrogance on his face as he picked up the woman on the ground and walked out of the temple. There was a middle-aged woman wearing a yellow dress standing in the sky. Her figure was quite mature and her breasts were quite big. Her skin was like jade and her looks were quite beautiful. She gave off a benevolent aura. Seeing Zhao Fu walk out while hugging her daughter, the beautiful woman understood what had happened and asked coldly, "Son-in-law, what did you do to my daughter?" Zhao Fu smiled as he replied, "Mother-in-law, Ling don't you think she's fine? If you don't believe me, you can ask Ling." The girl's name was Di Ling, and she smiled stiffly. The beautiful woman coldly harumphed and did not continue to ask about this matter. Instead, she said, "Good son-in-law, I heard that you want to betray me and join that pantheon." Zhao Fu smiled as he said, "That's right. Mother-in-law, how about you join the pantheon as well? If you and your daughters serve me well, I can give you a good position." The beautiful woman did not understand Zhao Fu's words and looked at Zhao Fu as she said, "You're not Wolfbane. You're from the pantheon, right?" Zhao Fu lightly laughed as he replied, "That's right, and I'm a god lord. Mother-in-law, what do you think? Are you willing to serve me?" The beautiful woman looked quite angry as she said, "You're seeking death." Boom! The beautiful woman waved her hand, and a massive yellow energy spread out, forming a 6-meter-long rhombus that gave off terrifying force as it shot toward Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu did not dare to be careless, because this was not his main body but the fat man's body. He could only use the evil spirit abyss flower's power. Boom! A massive wave of black, evil energy exploded out from Zhao Fu's body as massive pale white roots grew out of the ground and gave off terrifying power as they smashed towards the rhombus rocks. Bang! 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 The rhombus rocks were sent flying by the countless pale white roots, and the beautiful woman's expression fell as she stretched out a hand towards the countless roots and a terrifying power flowed out. The hand gave off an intense yellow light and yellow ripples of light, bringing with them a terrifying gravitational force, quickly spread out. Bang! Bang! The countless pale white roots were shattered by the yellow ripples of light, causing them to fly everywhere like a rain of wood. Suddenly, Zhao Fu's body disappeared and reappeared behind the beautiful woman. He gathered all of his divinity's power into his fist, causing it to give off black flames that seemed to twist the space around it. The beautiful woman felt quite startled and quickly tried to turn and defend, releasing a defensive barrier around her body. Boom! Zhao Fu's fist contained terrifying force that seemed to be able to destroy everything as it slammed against the defensive barrier. The defensive barrier was like a boulder that heavily crashed into the ground, causing the ground to crack and open up a crater that was dozens of meters wide. Within the crater, the defensive barrier had already been destroyed, and the beautiful woman lay on the ground with a trace of blood leaking out of her lips. She looked at Zhao Fu in extreme fury. wanting to crush Zhao Fu into paste. Boom! A massive wave of divine power exploded out from the beautiful woman's body as her body gave off intense divine light, forming terrifying gales. Zhao Fu's eyes became blood-red roses as he stretched out a hand towards the beautiful woman and shouted, "Seal!" Boom! Chapter 1886. Boom! A massive explosion sounded out as the beautiful woman exploded out with all of her divine power, causing intense godlight to flow out. A massive force pushed the pale white roots away, giving off a terrifying aura. Zhao Fu's expression was cold as he once again stretched out a hand towards the beautiful woman, and a massive wave of evil demonic power once again flowed out from his body. Boom! The pale white roots gave off even more terrifying power and flowed towards the beautiful woman. The intense god light was unable to stop the roots, and in the end, the beautiful woman was bound by the countless roots, and a massive wave of evil demonic power entered her body. The evil demonic power continuously flowed into her body, slowly taking control of her body. The beautiful woman's expression was quite unsightly, and her consciousness became more and more hazy. In the end, Zhao Fu obtained control of the beautiful woman. However, Zhao Fu was now controlling the ugly fatty's body, and he had used up a lot of his evil demonic power. Boom! 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 Suddenly, explosions sounded out as a few figures giving off massive amounts of divine power suddenly descended. All sorts of divine light shined out, causing the weather to change. Zhao Fu's expression slightly fell. Most of his evil demonic power had been used up, and only the fatty's divine power had not been used yet. The people who had come were 6 women. The first had a graceful figure and wore a white dress. She had a cold expression and was called Dilong. The second had tender skin and a slim figure. She had a delicate and pretty face and was called Di Shui. The third had a seductive figure and gave off a trace of unruliness. She was called Dilon. The fourth gave off a savage aura and was beautiful. She wore black clothes and was called Diin. The fifth was tall and slim and gave off a noble aura. She was called Diyu. The sixth was beautiful and gave off a gentle and quiet aura. She was called Dijing. The 6 women were all the earth god's daughters, and they were all godly spirits. Her faction was quite powerful, and including her, there were 7 godly spirits in total. If Di Ling had obtained the Wolfbane, which was the ugly fatty's divinity, her faction would have reached the level of an 8-brother godly spirit. Moreover, she would have devoured the Wolfbane's entire faction, and their faction would have become more powerful. It was a pity that because of Zhao Fu's appearance, all of their plans had been disrupted. They had sensed that their mother was in danger, and had immediately descended with powerful auras. Looking at the densely packed white roots, but unable to hear his mother's voice, Di coldly said, "What did you do to my mother? Say it, otherwise I'll kill you." Zhao Fu looked at the 6 women in front of him and smiled as he said, "Your mother is in those roots. Kill me? Do you have that kind of strength?" Hearing this, the women looked at the densely packed roots and saw that there was no longer any movement. They were shocked, thinking that their mothers had been killed by Zhao Fu. However, after sensing that their mother was still alive, they heaved a sigh of relief. Earthine said with a murderous look, "Where did you get the power to defeat our mother?" Dilong's beautiful eyes sized up Zhao Fu. "He's not Wolfbane. His demeanor and aura are different. Someone must have taken control of Wolfbane's body. Otherwise, with Wolfbane's strength, how could he have defeated our mother? Also, he was afraid when he saw the 6 of us. Of course, he wouldn't be like this." Earthine said to Zhao Fu, "Who are you?" Zhao Fu smiled and quickly recovered his power. He planned to stall for time and said, "Who am I? Make a guess." Dilung coldly harumphed, "We're not interested. Sisters, kill him and save our mother. We'll dig out Wolfbane's divinity and give it to our 7th sister." The other women also responded in unison. Zhao Fu wanted to stall for time and recover his devil spirit power, so he immediately said, "I can tell you who I am." Dilung directly said, "Don't listen to him. His aura is quite weak, and he must have used up a lot of energy fighting with our mother. Don't give him a chance to recover. Boom, boom, boom. The other women did not hesitate and waved their hands, blasting out terrifying divine power toward Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu's devil spirit power was too weak, so he could only use Wolfbane's divinity's power. A godly spirit aura exploded out, and a black energy barrier appeared, covering Zhao Fu's body. Bang! The 6 waves of divine power slammed against the barrier, and the massive power sent Zhao Fu flying back. He heavily crashed into the ground and opened up a large crater. The 6 goddesses were not weak, and Wolfbane's divine power could not compare to theirs. If Zhao Fu's main body was here, he would not have to fear the 6 goddesses. However, he was controlling Wolfbane's body, so he was too weak. Within the crater, a trace of blood leaked out of Zhao Fu's lips as he climbed up from the ground. He coldly looked at the 6 goddesses and started to use his remaining devil spirit power. 6 pale white spears appeared in the surroundings and gave off terrifying power as they shot towards the 6 goddesses. Facing the 6 pale white spears, the 6 goddesses looked quite disdainful. They swung their weapons, sending out cold lights that shattered the pale white spears without any pressure. Zhao Fu's blood-red rose-like eyes gave off a bewitching light, and Zhao Fu's body started to turn into a plant. His body became a pale white plant, and his hands became sharp claws, looking quite terrifying. At the same time, Zhao Fu's power continuously became stronger. Now, Zhao Fu's body had completely gone into the devil spirit power, and he exploded out with devil spirit power. Boom! Zhao Fu gave off a terrifying aura as he leapt into the sky and slashed out with his claws. 5 pale white crescents containing terrifying power flew towards the 6 goddesses. The goddesses' expressions slightly fell as they swung their weapons, sending out a cold light that shattered the pale white crescents. By now, Zhao Fu had reached one of the goddesses, and his sharp claws gave off ferocious aura as they grabbed towards her. The goddess' expression became cold as she sent power into her sword and vigorously stabbed out, sending out a sharp sword light containing shocking power toward Zhao Fu. Swish, swish, swish! Zhao Fu's outstretched hand turned into pale white roots that gave off evil power as they shot towards the goddess. The sharp sword light cut apart a few pale white roots, but even more pale white roots shot towards the goddess. The goddess was given a big fright and hurriedly unleashed a defensive barrier. The pale white roots tightly wrapped around the defensive barrier and vigorously pressed down, causing cracks to appear on the defensive barrier. The other goddesses hurriedly rushed toward Zhao Fu, their weapons giving off cold lights as they prepared to attack Zhao Fu. Suddenly, Zhao Fu gave off shocking power as his back bulged and pale white roots containing terrifying power shot towards the incoming goddesses. Chapter 1887. At that moment, Zhao Fu's hand, which had turned into countless tendrils, grabbed out, causing the countless tendrils to shrink. Bang! The goddess' defensive barrier shattered, and the goddess' expression became quite unsightly. Countless tendrils quickly wrapped around her, and the goddess exploded out with a wave of divine power, wanting to resist. However, a massive wave of demonic energy flowed into her. The goddess quickly lost control of her body, and her consciousness became hazy before she lost control of her body. The other goddesses slashed apart the tendrils and rushed in front of Zhao Fu. They sent immense power into their weapons, causing them to give off boundless cold light as they slashed toward Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu grabbed the unconscious goddess's body and threw her towards them, causing them to immediately retract their power and curse out, "Despicable!" 2 goddesses attacked from the other side, and Zhao Fu's other hand turned into countless tendrils. He vigorously swung out, giving off immense power as he slammed towards the 2 goddesses. Chi! 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 The 2 goddesses held their swords and vigorously slashed out, cutting apart the tendrils, causing the severed tendrils to fly everywhere. Zhao Fu gave off a powerful aura as he rushed in front of them. The tendrils gathered into two massive fists and punched out, giving off shocking power as they slammed into the two goddesses' bodies. Bang! Bang! Two muffled sounds sounded out as the two goddesses' bodies flew back and crashed into the ground, opening up two large craters. Inferno looked furious and exploded out with all of his godly spirit power. A green aura flame appeared around his body as he vigorously swung his sword, sending out an enormous sword light containing terrifying power toward Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu felt quite startled and stretched out countless pale white tendrils, forming a semicircular barrier in front of him. Bang! The sword light was incredibly terrifying and slashed apart the semicircular barrier. The massive power sent Zhao Fu flying back and heavily crashed on the ground, smashing open a large crater and coughing up a mouthful of blood. Netherworld held his sword and gave off a powerful aura as he charged at Zhao Fu with killing intent. Zhao Fu, who was lying on the ground, stretched out a hand, and an evil demonic energy flowed out. His hand turned into countless roots that gave off ferocious power as they shot towards the earth nether, giving off terrifying sounds. Earth-Yu's face was cold as he continuously slashed with the sword in his hand. He sent out many sword lights and cut off countless roots. The distance between them and Zhao Fu was getting closer and closer. Zhao Fu coldly harumphed, and his body erupted with a terrifying demonic power. Right now, Zhao Fu was burning the Wolfbane's life to stimulate the demonic power. A black wave of light spread out, and a demonic aura spread out. Swish, swish, swish. Pale white roots that were as thick as an arm shot out from the ground towards the earth nether with great power. Earth-Yu's expression fell, and she continuously slashed out with her sword, sending out sword lights that cut apart the pale white roots. However, there were simply too many of them. Not only did they shoot over from the front, but they also surrounded Earth-Yu from the sides. Suddenly, a pale white root shot out from a corner and bound Earth-Yu's foot before pulling downwards, causing Earth-Yu to lose her balance. A large number of pale white vines shot towards her, causing Earthgloom's expression to become startled. She swung the sword in her hand, slashing out sword lights that cut apart the pale white vines that shot over. However, there were even more pale white vines that wrapped around Earthgloom's body. Boom! An explosion sounded out as Earth-Yu hurriedly exploded out with terrifying divine power, wanting to break free, but a terrifying wave of evil demonic power suddenly flowed into her body. Earth-Yu's expression became quite unsightly, and she found that she was starting to lose control of her body. The other four goddesses hurriedly attacked Zhao Fu, and massive cold lights slashed toward Zhao Fu. Swish! 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 Even more massive pale white roots grew out from the ground, forming a protective barrier that protected Zhao Fu's body. Bang! 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 The beams of cold light slammed into the protective barrier, causing loud sounds to ring out. Countless roots were severed, and the ground also collapsed from a force. Rocks flew everywhere, and smoke and dust rose in all directions. One of the goddesses flew to Earth-Yu's side and vigorously swung her sword, cutting apart the pale white roots that had wrapped around Earth-Yu. However, Earth-Yu had already lost consciousness. The roots that had wrapped around her were cut apart, and her body fell to the ground. The goddesses hurriedly hugged Earth-Yu's body and examined it. The other three goddesses looked at the dust-filled crater, and after the dust settled, Zhao Fu's body appeared in front of the three goddesses. There was a wound on Zhao Fu's body that continuously leaked out blood. However, the pale white roots wrapped around the wound, causing it to quickly heal. However, Zhao Fu's face was quite pale. That attack just then had taken quite a bit of damage, and now Zhao Fu was burning this body's life force. Seeing that Zhao Fu was not dead yet, the three goddesses coldly harumphed and gave off powerful auras as they rushed at Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu got up from the ground and used the last bit of his evil demon power to condense his hand, which had turned into countless roots, into a single root towards the three goddesses. At the top of the rhizomes, a massive flower bud grew, and the surrounding heaven and earth power continuously gathered. The flower bud gave off an intensely bewitching, evil, and dark aura, and it blossomed into a rose-like flower that gave off a dreamlike light. Seeing that evil flower, the three goddesses gave off powerful auras, and their bodies gradually stopped. Their eyes lost their light as if they had fallen into an illusion, and the evil power continuously corroded them. Seeing this scene, the goddess hugging Earth felt quite startled and hurriedly sent all of her divine power into her sword, causing it to give off boundless light. The sword gave off an extremely terrifying power. Xing, the goddess vigorously slashed out with her sword, and a massive crescent flew out, giving off incredibly sharp power. It cut off the evil flower's roots, causing it to wither and disappear. The three goddesses returned to normal and looked at Zhao Fu with lingering fear. They felt that the person in front of them was quite terrifying, and they had almost lost all of their resistance. Zhao Fu's expression fell because that was his only evil demon power, and after using it, he no longer had any evil demon power. Moreover, because Zhao Fu had burned too much of his life force, his body quickly weakened. The three goddesses' expressions were cold as they vigorously stabbed out, and three massive sword lights containing immense power shot toward Zhao Fu, cutting Zhao Fu's body into countless pieces. Chapter 1889. This report was about how they viewed Pantheon and whether they wanted to start a war against Pantheon. If they wanted to do anything, Pantheon naturally had to make preparations. The results were not surprising. The various factions' hostility towards Pantheon was now even more intense than last time, because Pantheon had become even more powerful. However, they had not directly attacked Pantheon yet, and it seemed that they were waiting for an opportunity. Thinking to there, Zhao Fu dismounted and gave orders to digest these people as quickly as possible and strengthen the training of the new soldiers to prepare for war. After putting down this report, Zhao Fu picked up a few more and started to look through them. Di Ling looked at her mother and her 6 big sisters hanging in the air, continuously twisting their bodies in pain and making those sounds. She felt incredibly uncomfortable, and her eyes became filled with tears. Mother, 6 big sisters, now that our faction has fused with Pantheon and the residents and soldiers have been taken over by Pantheon, we no longer have any chance to resist. You should all submit to the God Lord. 3 of the goddesses wanted to submit to Zhao Fu, and they looked at Zhao Fu hungrily. However, because their other sisters and mother did not say anything, they could not say anything. At that moment, the Earth Goddess started to hesitate. She had fallen into Zhao Fu's hands, and her faction belonged to Pantheon. She could not resist at all, and if she did not submit, she would be continuously tortured by Zhao Fu. Thinking to there, the Earth Goddess felt incredibly ashamed. Her hands were tied together, and she was hanging in the air. She was not wearing any clothes, and that bastard had sent some sort of power into her for her to have such a great reaction. At that moment, Di Ling continued to persuade her, Mother, if you submit to the God Lord, you won't have to suffer so much anymore. The God Lord will dote on you. The Earth Goddess thought for a while and could not take it anymore. She gritted her teeth and nodded as she lightly nodded. Di Ling immediately happily ran over to Zhao Fu's side and hugged Zhao Fu's arm as she said, God Lord, Mother is willing to submit to you, so you can let them go. Hearing this, Zhao Fu raised his head and glanced at the beautiful woman in midair. The beautiful woman also looked at Zhao Fu with a trace of passion, but she felt ashamed and turned her head away. Zhao Fu waved his hand, and the chains that bound their hands loosened. Their bodies fell from midair and fell powerlessly to the ground. At the same time, Zhao Fu grasped, and a formless energy flowed out, sealing the 6 desires' demonic qi within the women's bodies. The beautiful woman and the others also returned to normal, but the blush on their faces did not recede. Zhao Fu turned his head and revealed a trace of a smile. Help your mother and sisters put on some clothes. After you recover your strength, Come find me at the Pantheon Palace." Ling was a little surprised and said with a red face, "God Lord, didn't you want me, mother, and sisters to serve you together? Now, we are all prepared to receive the Lord God's favor." Zhao Fu chuckled and said, "When we have time. There are important matters to take care of right now." Ling felt quite disappointed and thought of something as she said shyly, "God Lord, I'm still a virgin. I haven't been touched by wolfsbane. Also, wolfsbane is actually an intersex person. It is both a man's thing and a woman's thing." Zhao Fu already knew about this because Zhao Fu had controlled his body. This was one of the reasons why Zhao Fu was at ease with wolfsbane's body. Zhao Fu lightly laughed, "I know." Following this, Zhao Fu stood up and left the room. Ling smiled as she came to her mother and big sister's side and took out some clothes for them. Seeing Zhao Fu leave, the beautiful woman asked in disappointment, "Didn't that bastard say he wanted us to serve him together? Why is he leaving now?" Ling smiled as she said, "The Lord God said that he had some matters to take care of, so he left first. However, he will take care of me, mother, and my 6 big sisters in the future." The beautiful woman's expression eased up a bit, and she took the clothes from Ling. The other women quickly put on their clothes, and their faces were still burning hot. The humiliation from before had not receded, and they felt that Zhao Fu was simply too evil and shameless. After a while, the beautiful woman and the other women recovered some of their strength, and Ling brought them to the Pantheon Palace. The beautiful woman and the other women came to the Pantheon Palace and looked at the black marble floor, exquisite white walls, and the statues at the center. There was also a platinum-colored spear stabbed into the platform at the center, and they all looked quite shocked. Among them, there were already a few statues of them placed in the outer area. The statues gathered together gave off a godly might, giving off a formless pressure. It was as if they were facing true gods, and they gave off a solemn and holy aura. The beautiful woman's eyes fell on the 10,000 god spear on the platform, and her heart trembled because she could sense the aura of many godly spirit legacies within it. Not only is the Pantheon Palace called the Pantheon Palace, but it also has a legacy item. Moreover, this legacy power is so powerful. No wonder he said that he was the Lord God and ruled over countless godly spirits. Now that he has this legacy item, he has the right to be the Lord God and rule over countless godly spirits. Thinking about that, the beautiful woman felt quite shocked and could not help but feel quite excited. She had a feeling that the Pantheon Palace might really be able to rule over all godly spirits in the future. If she joined the Pantheon Palace early, her status would become higher and higher, and she would be countless times better than before. Now, the great Earth God did not regret her words and gave a trace of a smile. Zhao Fu stood on the platform, and Ling brought the great Earth God's women over and bowed as she said, "Lord God, we're here." Zhao Fu had just absorbed the godly spirit's divine power and had them send their divine power into the 10,000 god spear, strengthening its power. Zhao Fu looked at them and said, "Now, send your divine power into the spear. Those with legacy power and those without legacy power, send your divine power." The great Earth God's women obeyed and stood by the side. They stretched out a hand, and a massive wave of godly spirits flowed out, forming waves of different powers that flowed into the 10,000 god spear. The 10,000 god spear continuously absorbed this divine power and gave off all sorts of divine light. Its aura became stronger and stronger. In the end, the 10,000 god spear absorbed countless traces of divine power and once again became stronger, and the Pantheon Palace's stats once again became stronger. Zhao Fu had already absorbed their divine power before teaching them, so he did not need to absorb anymore. Seeing how pale their faces were, Zhao Fu smiled and had them go down to recover their strength. Sensing Zhao Fu's concern, the great Earth God gave a trace of a smile and took her daughters to recover their strength. She planned to have a good chat with Zhao Fu when she had time. Chapter 1890. Now that the 10,000 god spear had absorbed 38 godly spirits' divine power, its power was quite monstrous. Zhao Fu pulled out the 10,000 god spear and swung it a few times, causing terrifying ripples to spread out. Zhao Fu felt quite satisfied as he put the 10,000 god spear back in. Zhao Fu did not have any plans because he had just fused with so many factions and needed some time to digest them. As such, Zhao Fu could not do anything. After returning to the 10,000 god palace, Zhao Fu was taking care of some matters. The Jade Goddess looked quite displeased as she walked in and said, "What are you doing with those goddesses in the room? I saw them powerlessly walk out with red faces." Zhao Fu lightly laughed and said, "I didn't do much. I just tamed them." The Jade Goddess gave a trace of a smile as she sat on Zhao Fu's body and wrapped her arms around Zhao Fu's waist as she said somewhat shyly, "You said that you were going to spoil me first. Don't do anything to the other goddesses first." Zhao Fu smiled as he hugged the Jade Goddess and lightly nodded before asking, "Have you made any progress on the things I asked you to look into?" Now that his faction had become powerful, he had the ability to gather information. Zhao Fu had the Jade Goddess look into information about the time god, or things that contain the attribute of time. The Jade Goddess replied, "I did not find anything. There are not many godly spirits related to time in the godly spirit world, and their power is quite terrifying. They have the ability to change time in an area." Zhao Fu frowned as he said, "Everything is different from what I expected. Even though there are time gods in the godly spirit world, there are very few of them." According to the Jade Goddess, being able to control time in an area is quite terrifying. No matter what kind of situation they are in, they can use time to reverse time and return to an advantageous position. If they cannot win, they can also use time to return to a certain place. They are incredibly difficult to deal with. As such, in the godly spirit world, time gods are very powerful godly spirits. Zhao Fu said somewhat disappointedly, "Continue to gather information about this." The Jade Goddess felt quite confused as she asked, "Why are you looking for these things? Are they useful to you?" Zhao Fu grunted, "You'll know in the future." She then said, "Actually, it's not like I didn't gain anything this time. I heard that King of Pantheons event will be starting again." Zhao Fu already knew that the god territory was the central region of the godly spirit world. However, the King of Gods did not know this, so he asked, "Tell me the details." The Jade Goddess smiled and began to explain to Zhao Fu. God's domain's King of Pantheon was jointly organized by the various major powers of God's domain. It was held once every 9 years, and it was the largest event in God's domain, attracting the attention of the entire God's domain. Every time, the various deities would come, and there would be all sorts of deities. The god of time that Zhao Fu was looking for would most likely be there. If Zhao Fu went there, he would definitely find the god of time. Hearing this, Zhao Fu couldn't help but feel pleasantly surprised. Many young gods would compete intensely in this event, and the final victor would be given the title of God's King. This was a supreme glory, and they would receive the blessing of the entire godly spirit world's fate. They would truly be the God's King in name. Of course, this title would only be given for 9 years. After 9 years, the King of Gods event would be held again, and a new King of Gods would be born. Everyone could only participate in this event once, and if they lost this opportunity, they would never be able to become the King of Gods in this lifetime. As such, the various deities attached great importance to this event. During this event, people who obtained different rankings would receive rewards, and the top 100 people would receive them. After all, it was the largest event in the godly spirit world, so the rewards would naturally be quite valuable. What made Zhao Fu feel quite delighted was that the first place reward, which was the King of God's reward, was the God's Fire. The God's Fire was a type of flame that was formed from countless godly flames. It had the power to burn gods, and it was one of the most terrifying flames in the world. If one could fuse it into one's body, one would be able to directly control this terrifying power. The reason why Zhao Fu was so delighted was not that Zhao Fu wanted to fuse with the God's Fire, but that he could use it to forge a primordial cauldron, which would give the spirit maiden the ability to refine the world's consciousness. The primordial cauldron's main material was the origin god iron, which Zhao Fu had obtained in the Outlander realm. The Tao-seeking stone was the core material, which could be found on the Alchemy World Exchange stone steel. Now, Qin was continuously earning points to exchange for the Tao-seeking stone. The final material for the primordial cauldron was an extremely terrifying flame. It would be best if it was one of the most terrifying flames in the world, and the god's fire completely fulfilled this requirement. If he could obtain the god's fire and the origin god iron, he could exchange for the Tao-seeking stone and give it to the spirit maiden to forge the primordial cauldron. With the primordial cauldron, the spirit maiden would be able to devour the consciousnesses of the various worlds and become an existence similar to the heaven-awakened world. When he thought of that, Zhao Fu could not help but feel excited and asked, "When will the King of Gods event start?" The Jade Goddess pouted and said, "Why are you in such a hurry? There's still half a year before it starts. There's no point in rushing over now." Hearing this, Zhao Fu felt quite startled and thought to himself, "Half a year? There's still so much time left. Indeed, there's no need to rush. Let's develop the Pantheon Palace first before heading to the God Domain." As such, he smiled and said, "I understand. This information is very useful to me." The Jade Goddess felt quite happy and smiled. "That's good. What do you plan to do now?" "Pantheon Palace." Zhao Fu thought for a moment before replying, "I'll first digest the devoured factions and then destroy the larger factions in the surroundings so that the Pantheon Palace will not be in any danger. When that time comes, I'll leave the Pantheon Palace to the 5 of you. I'll also be leaving to go to the God Domain." The Jade Goddess said somewhat unhappily, "You're not going to take me with you? I want to go to the God Domain with you. I've never been to that place before, so I can go and have a look. As for the factions, I'll leave them to the 4 of them." Zhao Fu lightly laughed as he said, "That won't do. I don't know what we'll encounter on the way. Also, isn't it better for you to stay here as the palace master?" The Jade Goddess said worriedly, "I'm just worried about a bad person like you. If you hook up with another goddess and come back to cripple us, what will we do? I feel that staying by your side is safer." Chapter 1891. This sort of military matter had to be dealt with seriously, or the consequences would be severe. If they were still an army like before and were all familiar with each other, some people might be dissatisfied with Pantheon and want to rebel against Pantheon, and it would be easy for others to rebel as well. Moreover, they were all within Pantheon, and their people were all gathered together. As long as they attacked Pantheon, they would be able to take down large areas and cause great destruction. Zhao Fu had to split up these forces, which would form a new army. However, this army would no longer belong to the previous faction, but to Pantheon. At the same time, he strengthened military discipline, and some soldiers who were dissatisfied with Pantheon would be immediately executed. Even though they were a part of Pantheon, if they were not dealt with as soon as possible, they would be a disaster. They had to die, and this would allow them to establish the prestige that they deserved among the soldiers. As for the various generals, they came from various factions. Some had outstanding abilities, and some did not. Zhao Fu handed this matter to the Iron and Stone Goddess. She was quite skilled in managing military affairs. Zhao Fu felt that the Iron and Stone Goddess was quite capable. Some outstanding generals could be put in important positions, and Zhao Fu would not kill those who were not capable. He would give them some money and have them do other things. The reason he gave them money was because they were all generals. Even if they were not put in important positions, they would at least receive some benefits. Only then would they be convinced. After dealing with military matters, Zhao Fu turned his attention to internal affairs. The current Pantheon was centered around the Jade Goddess faction. It had originally been a very small faction, and it did not have many buildings and measures. Zhao Fu mobilized a large number of people to construct all sorts of buildings and measures. Some of the people at the borders also needed to be gathered together. There were often battles at the borders, and if commoners were there, not only would they die easily, but they would also be taken by others and become commoners of other factions. Gathering them together was not only to protect them, but also to prevent them from running away. They also needed to construct many houses and other buildings, and Zhao Fu once again sent people to help. For days later, the situation had stabilized, and Zhao Fu brought the 5 goddesses to the army to investigate. "Greetings, Divine Master!" Countless soldiers knelt on the ground and shouted in unison. Their voices reverberated in all directions, carrying with them a divine dignity. Zhao Fu smiled and asked them to get up. These soldiers were dressed in white armor and stood in an orderly manner. Their expressions were dignified and serene, and they gave off powerful auras, causing the air to seem to freeze. Even from far away, one could sense how terrifying this place was. At the very front, there were many military flags. The flagpole was made of white metal, and the flag cloth was also white. However, there were different patterns printed on them. There were black iron swords, golden helmets, cyan shields, green trees, blue rivers, gray flowers, silver snakes, blood-red tigers, purple clouds. Each flag represented an army. This was not done by Zhao Fu, but by the goddess of iron and stone who had completely broken up the soldiers and rebuilt them. At the same time, there were different commanders and generals. Now that Zhao Fu was the supreme commander, all of the soldiers and generals had to obey him. The godly spirits only had a small amount of military power, and none of the godly spirits could gather a large number of soldiers without Zhao Fu's permission. Looking at these soldiers, Zhao Fu gave a pleased smile. The goddess of iron and stone gave a trace of a smile as she said, "How is it? I'm doing quite well, right?" Zhao Fu smiled and nodded. The goddess of iron and stone smiled as she said, "Now that these soldiers have gone through a few days of training, they have grasped the 10,000 godly power within their bodies and will be able to use it. However, if they want to use this 10,000 godly power, they will need a lot of training." Zhao Fu nodded and said, "I'll leave the rest to you then." The goddess of iron and stone happily bowed and smiled as she said, "Thank you, Divine Master. I won't let you down." The goddess of iron and stone lightly laughed as she said, "You're still calling me iron and stone? We're all calling you husband, so if you belong to us, don't blame us." The goddess of iron and stone's face became red, and she rolled her eyes at the goddess of iron and stone as she said, "We're in front of the army, so we naturally have to be respectful. In private, I'll call you husband." Zhao Fu did not mind their words and looked at the Pantheon Palace's soldiers as he said, "Now, we can meet the commoners." The goddess of iron and stone gave a trace of a smile as she said, "Husband, I've already prepared this matter. The commoners are waiting to meet you, the ruler of the 10,000 gods, the supreme existence of the Pantheon Palace." Zhao Fu smiled as he nodded. Following this, Zhao Fu followed the goddess of iron and stone to a white building that was 100 meters tall. This building had a Gothic style, and there were exquisite carvings on the walls. At the center of the building, there was a road. The road was 6 meters wide, and the ground was covered with a white carpet and sprinkled with white flowers. At the end of the road was a round stone stage, and there were 2 dignified and holy statues of soldiers on either side. There were countless people gathered below. There were simply too many of them to count. Zhao Fu came to the top of the building and put on a white cloak. He walked out of the building and followed the road to the stage. The countless commoners below looked incredibly excited and made all sorts of noises. Some were filled with admiration, some were filled with respect, and some were filled with praise. Following this, the commoners all knelt on the ground and clasped their hands together as they devoutly looked at Zhao Fu on the stone stage. This was because to them, Zhao Fu was an existence above godly spirits. He was a god that was even greater than godly spirits. Zhao Fu loved that the commoners were so fervent towards him, and he could not help but smile. His plan from before had been very successful, and the Pantheon Palace should have established a faction like this. "My subjects rise." Zhao Fu also spoke, his voice filled with dignity and reverberating throughout the entire battlefield. It was the first time that the commoners had seen Zhao Fu, and hearing that Zhao Fu had become even more excited, the scene became even more lively. No matter if they were men or women, elderly or children, they all clasped their hands together as they excitedly looked at Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu waved his hand, and the scene became silent again. No one dared to make a sound, and they were even more respectful and devout to Zhao Fu than to a godly spirit. Chapter 1892. My people, I am the God Master of the Pantheon Palace, the one who controls the Pantheon Palace. If you believe in me, I will protect you. Do you feel blessed living in the Pantheon Palace? Zhao Fu's holy and dignified voice sounded like a bell being struck, sounding throughout the entire area. The countless residents below the stage put their palms together and excitedly replied, "We are willing to believe in the Lord forever. We are incredibly blessed." Even though everyone's voices were not very loud, when they were gathered together, it was like an ocean of sound, and it gave off a holy and boundless aura as it spread out. Zhao Fu smiled and slowly spread out his hands as a formless energy spread out. The Pantheon Palace's Pantheon Spear gave off a massive amount of power. Heaven and earth power quickly gathered above Zhao Fu, and a boundless divine might spread out. Rays of multicolored divine light shot down from the sky, landing on the residents below. After being hit by the divine light, the residents became much more energetic, and some of their injuries started to recover. Standing on the stone stage in the air, Zhao Fu's body was covered with multicolored light, making him look incredibly holy and divine, as if he was a god among gods. The countless residents once again knelt on the ground with fervent expressions on their faces. They put their palms together and looked at Zhao Fu with pious gazes as they yelled, "Our Lord, the heavens bless us." Their voices were incredibly loud and sounded out in all directions. Even from very far away, one could feel the fervor here. The metal stone goddess and the others stood within the white building. Looking at the countless residents below and hearing those voices, they could not help but feel quite shocked. Now, all of the residents had become fervent believers, and they worshipped even more fervently than godly spirits like them. If it wasn't for the fact that Zhao Fu's divinity could not absorb faith energy, they would have been flooded with faith energy. From how they saw it, not only did Zhao Fu have great control over his strength, but he also had terrifying control over his thoughts. Luckily, Zhao Fu only had a divinity. If he was a true, godly spirit, he would have stolen all of their faith energy. At the same time, they were quite curious to see just how terrifying Zhao Fu's country was in the heaven-awakened world. Zhao Fu allowed the divine light to last for a while before slowly dissipating. In the end, he returned to the white building with a trace of a smile. This was also the first time he had met so many commoners. As the leader of a faction, he had to meet his subjects. Otherwise, if they only knew of his existence but had not seen him with their own eyes, they would not recognize him as much. After dealing with these matters, Zhao Fu returned to Myriad God Palace and received the latest news. At this time, the various parties had already made some preparations and seemed to want to attack the Pantheon Temple directly. Right now, the Pantheon Temple was still in the process of digesting their forces. Their various forces were already in disarray, and they would need to train for a period of time before they could work together. Moreover, they had yet to familiarize themselves with the power of Pantheon. If they participated in a battle, their performance would not be too good. The people had just moved and gathered, and their hearts were only temporarily stable. They were easily affected by other things and became very uneasy and fearful. This was not a good time for a battle to break out in the Pantheon Temple. After thinking for a while, Zhao Fu ordered people to gather information from the various major factions. The ones who posed a threat were these major factions, and if they could be dealt with, the Pantheon Temple would be much safer. Of course, sneak attacks like before couldn't be used, because that kind of large faction couldn't be compared to small factions. All kinds of measures were very complete, and they were very strong. Sneaking over would be very easy to be discovered. Moreover, Zhao Fu had already used this method before, so the various factions had most likely sensed it. It was just that they had not made any noise because they had already made preparations. The reason why Zhao Fu had gathered information from the various factions was because he understood that the various factions would not only be hostile towards the Pantheon Temple. Their hostility towards the Pantheon Temple was only because the Pantheon Temple had grown too quickly and had become a threat to them. However, there was no enmity between the two sides. In terms of enmity, there were many conflicts and wars between the various factions for the sake of their beliefs and benefits. These things had accumulated over time, causing the enmity between the various factions to become deeper and deeper. Now, they could not be reconciled. Now, they could make use of their enmity. If they fought, they would not attack the Pantheon Temple, and the Pantheon Temple would be able to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. After looking through all of the information, Zhao Fu smiled and found a few targets to make a move on. However, Zhao Fu did not act and continued to make the Pantheon Temple seem harmless and harmless. Zhao Fu continued to send gifts to the various factions, saying that it was to celebrate the various factions joining the Pantheon Temple. At the same time, he continued to welcome the various factions and stated that the Pantheon Temple would not expand outwards and was willing to coexist peacefully with the various factions. The various factions were not surprised by the Pantheon Temple's actions. Last time, when they had wanted to attack the Pantheon Temple had expressed goodwill. Now that they wanted to attack the Pantheon Temple again, it was understandable that the Pantheon Temple would continue to express goodwill. Some factions felt quite disdainful towards the Pantheon Temple and felt that it was too spineless and cowardly. It only knew how to express goodwill and not attack the Pantheon Temple. It was not as domineering as it had been when it had first risen up, but now it seemed too weak. As such, their hostility towards the Pantheon Temple decreased, and they felt that the Pantheon Temple was not much of a threat and could be easily destroyed. Some forces thought that the Pantheon Temple was hypocritical and disgusting. They were obviously very ambitious, but they pretended to be a sheep instead of a ferocious wolf. Now, the Pantheon Temple had gone from a small faction to a point where it could threaten them. They did not want the Pantheon Temple to continue to develop, as it would definitely surpass them. Right now, they wanted to destroy the Pantheon Temple and not allow it to continue to develop. It was just that they had not found a suitable opportunity. If they attacked the Pantheon Temple as a single faction, it would be impossible because the losses would be too great. They would not do something so stupid. Zhao Fu did not care about the various factions' attitudes towards the Pantheon Temple. After all, he was just putting on an act to make it seem like the Pantheon Temple was not much of a threat and gain some support from the people. However, the Pantheon Temple would definitely not be so obedient and not expand. At night, a large and round moon gave off bright moonlight, illuminating the dark blue sky. There were no stars around it. Zhao Fu started to act. His target this time was the faction that had the greatest enmity towards the Pantheon Temple. Because that faction was the closest to the Pantheon Temple, it felt the greatest threat from the Pantheon Temple and wanted to attack it. Chapter 1893. Zhao Fu's target was not them, but one of their armies. Zhao Fu had said before that the enmity between the various factions was quite great, and it was even greater than Pantheon's. If he tried to sow discord between them, there would be a war. That way, they would not attack Pantheon, and Pantheon would be able to take advantage of them, killing two birds with one stone. This faction's greatest opponent was the faction on the left, which was called the Bear God faction. They had 400 million people and 30 million soldiers. They had 8 godly spirits, but their strength was quite average. Zhao Fu's plan was to control one of the Mountain God faction's armies to attack the Bear God faction. There was a great enmity between the two factions, and their strength was about the same. Once something like this happened, it was very likely that a war would break out. A while later, Zhao Fu came to the boundary between the two factions. There were Mountain God soldiers standing guard on the defensive walls, and there were sticks with illumination pearls embedded into the defensive walls, giving off light in all directions. A faction's forces would not be gathered in one place and would instead be spread out. Otherwise, if the 30 million soldiers gathered together, it would be difficult for Zhao Fu to deal with them, let alone control them. Zhao Fu hid in the air and looked below. Apart from the soldiers on the city walls, There was also a military camp below the city walls, and there were many soldiers there as well. There were roughly 500,000 or so soldiers in total, which was not a lot for Zhao Fu and was within his control. Zhao Fu came to the ground and squatted down in a dark corner and pressed a hand against the ground. Boom! An explosion sounded out as massive amounts of demonic energy flowed out of Zhao Fu's body. An exquisite black magic formation rose up from the ground, giving off a faint black light and an evil and bewitching aura. Zhao Fu's eyes became a pair of blood-red roses, and he once again pressed his hand against the ground, causing a massive wave of demonic energy to flow into the ground. The soldiers on the city walls were guarding, and the soldiers in the barracks were either sleeping or eating supper. They didn't notice anything wrong at all. Wisps of black aura surged out from the ground and quietly entered their bodies. In an instant, the soldiers on the city wall and the soldiers in the barracks froze. Their eyes turned black and then returned to normal. Zhao Fu's mouth curled into a smile as he walked out from a dark corner. The rest of the mountain god soldiers gathered behind Zhao Fu with cold expressions on their faces. After gathering countless soldiers, Zhao Fu directly attacked the nearby bear deity forces. The bear god faction soldiers were on the city walls, and seeing this large-scale attack, they looked quite confused. They could not understand why the mountain god soldiers would suddenly attack without any warning. However, seeing this scene, they did not hesitate and immediately sounded the alarm. Countless bear god soldiers gathered, and the battle between the two sides began. Shio, shio, shio. Arrows containing immense force shot towards the city walls, giving off a massive aura. The bear god soldiers on the city wall were just about to raise their shields to block the arrows. Suddenly, a wave of evil energy flowed into their bodies, causing their bodies to freeze. Arrows pierced through their bodies, causing blood to fly everywhere, and the soldiers fell to the ground, dead. The countless mountain god soldiers gave off ferocious auras and easily charged up the city walls. This was because the bear god soldiers on the city walls were all frozen in place, looking like blocks of wood. This was because Zhao Fu had used demonic power to control the bear god soldiers on the city walls. The mountain god soldiers attacked the city walls, waved the weapons in their hands, and directly killed the soldiers who were standing still in place, then rushed behind the city walls, charging into small towns and massacring them. After hearing about this, the bear god faction was infuriated. They mobilized the surrounding armies to destroy the mountain god soldiers, but they were unable to calm the flames of fury in their hearts. The mountain god faction suddenly attacked us and killed so many residents and soldiers. We want them to pay the price. I suggest that we gather all of our forces to attack the mountain god faction. I feel that it's quite strange. Why did the 500,000 soldiers suddenly attack and break through our defenses so easily? No matter what the reason is, the truth is that the divine bear soldiers attacked us, so we must make them pay the price. They have already attacked our forces and killed our soldiers and commoners. If we don't do anything, would we still have any face? If I'm not convinced, will the soldiers and residents be convinced? Don't be in such a hurry. I think that we can fight. Recently, the mountain god faction's movements have been quite strange, and their attitude has been quite arrogant. Why don't we act first? That's right. We can act now and make the mountain god faction behave. I've been waiting for this day. We can take revenge for the enmity from last time and this time. Because both sides already had grievances with each other, this incident was like a fuse. No matter what was strange about it, the majority of the bear god faction agreed to attack the mountain god faction. In the end, the bear god faction gathered their forces and attacked the mountain god soldiers. The mountain god faction was also quite confused. They did not know why the soldiers had gone to attack the bear god faction without their orders, and why they had easily broken through and started to massacre the bear god faction. Some of the mountain god faction's expressions became quite unsightly because they felt the aura of a scheme. There was definitely someone plotting something. However, it was their soldiers who had attacked. How could they explain it? There was no way to explain it. even if they found a reason to explain it. Would the Bear God faction just let it go? It was an enemy to begin with. They had no choice but to fight this battle. Some of the Mountain God faction's people were the more warlike type. Hearing that their soldiers had killed their way into the Bear God faction, they were quite happy because they were killing enemies. Now that they were facing the Bear God faction's attack, they strongly wanted to fight. In the end, the Mountain God's power could only accept the challenge. Since the Bear God's power was attacking, they couldn't just stand there and let the Bear God's power attack them. In their hearts, they really wanted to attack the Bear God's power and vent their disgust. Kill! The Bear God faction's soldiers charged forwards, giving off a massive aura as they flooded towards the Mountain God faction. Their auras were incredibly ferocious and could cause people to feel terror. The Mountain God army on the city walls were filled with killing intent. Facing their old enemies, they wanted to kill them to take revenge for their family and friends who had died in the past. The battle quickly started, and blood continuously flew everywhere as cries continuously sounded out. Both sides continuously fought, and the scene was completely chaotic. Chapter 1894. After watching the two sides fight intensely, Zhao Fu did not continue to participate. Instead, he disappeared and headed to his next target. This time, Zhao Fu chose 3 targets. The Mountain God was actually only the first, and there were 2 other targets. There could not be too many of them. Even though they could create a lot of conflicts, Pantheon would be too suspicious. Anyone with a discerning eye would be able to tell that it was Pantheon who was causing trouble. It might incur the wrath of all the factions, and they would launch ferocious attacks against Pantheon. The second target was one of the most powerful factions here. It had a population of 600 million and a military force of 50 to 60 million. Its strength was similar to the current Pantheon. This faction was called the Sun God faction, and it had 3 gods. Even though there were not many of them, the 3 gods were very terrifying. Normally, 3 ordinary gods would not be able to defeat one. There were no comparable factions nearby, and the most powerful one only had 400 million factions, 30 million soldiers, and 6 gods. Zhao Fu quickly arrived at the Sun God faction. The 2 factions were quite large, and if Zhao Fu controlled some of the Sun God faction soldiers to attack that faction might not attack with their full strength. Controlling that faction's soldiers to attack the Sun God faction was not very good, as a weak faction could not suddenly attack a powerful faction. This way, many people understood that someone was plotting something. Most importantly, Zhao Fu had just used this method. If he used it a second time, it would be very easy to link this to the previous matter. However, because Zhao Fu had gathered information from all sides, he thought of another method. The Sun God faction had a very talented son, who was also very handsome. He was the most popular man in the Sun God faction. However, he was quite arrogant, and apart from the 3 gods, everyone else saw him as a lowly being. This made him hated by many people. Zhao Fu's target was him. At that moment, the son was in a luxurious room, looking at an extremely beautiful woman beside him. This woman had long golden hair, fair skin, and a pair of golden eyes. She was tall and wore a white dress. She was the Sun Saint, and her aptitude was also very high, only slightly inferior to the Sun Saint. She was also the number 1 beauty of the Sun God's faction. The 2 of them had been designated as husband and wife by the 3 gods because the 3 gods wanted to use them to give birth to a divine son of the sun. The divine prince of Apollo Palace was very talented and had a large amount of divine spirit chi. He would lead the solar forces to glory. The Sun Saint's son looked at the Sun Saint daughter with a hint of arrogance. Although your conditions are not as good as mine, I still quite like you. Now that the gods have betrothed you to me, you should accept me as soon as possible. The Sun Saint daughter frowned. She clearly didn't like the way the Sun Saint's son spoke, and she calmly said, I understand this. I will accept God's arrangement to marry you and give birth to a God's child, but not now. I don't belong to you, so please don't interfere with my matters. The Sun Holy Sun lightly laughed and said domineeringly, "You've been mine from the very beginning, and I don't like you coming into contact with any men. You have to maintain your purity and stay away from other men in the future." The Sun Saint daughter felt quite furious and glared at the Sun Saint son. The Sun Saint son did not mind at all and smiled as he said, "Remember this. I'll be leaving now." Suddenly, a black-cloaked figure appeared in the room. The Sun Saint son was quite startled and sensed how terrifying this person was. "Who are you? You dare to come here?" The Sun Saint daughter looked at the man who had silently appeared in the room, and her expression fell. She also understood how powerful Zhao Fu was. Zhao Fu looked at the Sun Saint son and did not reply. His eyes became blood-red roses as a massive wave of demonic energy exploded out and flooded towards the Sun Saint son. Even though the Sun Saint son was quite powerful to others, he was extremely weak to Zhao Fu. The Sun Saint son wanted to explode out with the power of the sun to resist, but he was directly inundated by the demonic energy. The demonic energy flooded into his body and quickly took control of his body. Seeing that the Sun Saint son was being controlled so easily, the Sun Saint daughter's heart sank, and she immediately wanted to leave. However, a terrifying gaze turned towards her, causing the Sun Saint daughter's body to freeze. She felt a wave of terror in her heart. This person in front of her was many times more terrifying than godly spirits. Zhao Fu stretched out a hand, and a massive wave of demonic energy flowed towards the Sun Saint daughter. The Sun Saint daughter did not want to end up like the Sun Saint son, so she hurriedly knelt on the ground and said, "This lowly girl is willing to submit to Sir." Before, the Sun Saint daughter had wanted to leave because she did not like the Sun Saint son. However, the three godly spirits had forced her to become the Sun Saint son's wife, and for her own safety, she was willing to submit to Zhao Fu. From how she saw it, Zhao Fu definitely did not have a good reason for coming here, or else he would not have been so secretive. When Zhao Fu heard this, his expression didn't change. The devilish energy continued to flow towards the Holy Sun Maiden. The Holy Daughter of the Sun was shocked, and just as she was about to resist, the wretched devil chi flowed into her body. She didn't react at all, and only then did she let out a sigh of relief. She understood that Zhao Fu had accepted her submission. Zhao Fu looked at the Sun Holy Maiden and said calmly, "Let's go." The Sun Saintess nodded and got up from the ground. Zhao Fu sent out a wave of power, which enveloped the two of them, and they disappeared as they flew towards the forces to the side. The Sun Saint daughter flew behind Zhao Fu and asked carefully, "Lord, what's going on? May I know your identity?" Zhao Fu flew in front. Now that the Sun Holy Daughter had submitted to him, he did not hide anything and replied, "Pantheon Palace's God Lord." The Sun Holy Daughter looked at Zhao Fu in shock. She had never thought that the person in front of her was the Pantheon Palace's God Lord. No wonder he was so powerful. In that case, why was he bringing the two of them to the forces next to the Sun God? The Sun Holy Daughter could faintly guess at something, and her expression became nervous. Following this, Zhao Fu and the others came to a city. Zhao Fu and the Sun Holy Daughter hid in the air, while the Sun Saint son directly rushed into the city and started a massacre. He took out his saber and continuously sent out saber lights, killing the commoners and causing them to cry out. The Sun Holy Daughter stood next to Zhao Fu and looked at the Sun Saint son, who was being controlled. She knew that if she had not submitted, she would have ended up like this. Chapter 1895. The city soldiers quickly rushed over and started to attack the Sun Holy Son. Arrows flew over, but the Sun Holy Son vigorously slashed out with his saber, sending out a powerful saber light that destroyed the countless arrows. Following this, the Sun Holy Son rushed into the army of soldiers and once again started a massacre. He continuously slashed out with his saber, killing soldiers one by one. Boom! A massive aura exploded out from the city as a man dressed in armor furiously held a large axe and gave off terrifying power as he slashed towards the Sun Saint son. However, the Sun Holy Son did not resist at all and allowed the axe to slash towards him. The Sun Holy Sun was split in half, and blood flew everywhere as he died on the spot. The city lord was quite startled and had never thought that the Sun Holy Sun would be killed so easily. It was as if the Sun Holy Sun had been seeking death. Seeing this, the Sun Holy Daughter could not help but feel afraid and worried as she asked, "God Lord, is there anything I can help you with?" Zhao Fu turned to look at the Sun Holy Daughter and gave a trace of a smile as he said, "You can go back and pretend that nothing has happened. However, if anything happens in the future, you have to report to me. If you perform well, I'll make you the Sun God." The Sun Holy Daughter gave a trace of a smile and inwardly let out a sigh of relief. She had been worried that Zhao Fu would treat her like the Sun Holy Sun. Moreover, becoming a god was incredibly tempting to her. Within the Sun Gods faction, the authority and faith were all controlled by the three Sun Gods, and no one else could become a god. Thinking about that, the Sun Holy Daughter looked slightly respectful as she said, "I'll definitely be loyal to the God Lord." Zhao Fu smiled and nodded as he stretched out a hand, causing 6 traces of demonic qi to flow out. Zhao Fu pressed down on the Sun Holy Daughter's abdomen and sent the 6 traces of demonic qi into her. The Sun Holy Daughter was an important pawn in destroying the Sun God's faction, and she might be of great use. As such, Zhao Fu once again left behind a restriction on her. The Sun Holy Daughter immediately sensed the power within her body, and her face became red. Her breathing became ragged as her body powerlessly fell towards Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile and hugged her as he sealed the 6 desires' demonic qi. The Sun Holy Maiden returned to normal, and she wanted to leave Zhao Fu's embrace. However, her body didn't want to do so. The Sun Holy Maiden lay in Zhao Fu's embrace, and her beautiful eyes looked at Zhao Fu's face, which was even more handsome than the Sun Saint Child's, and her heart couldn't help but be moved. Zhao Fu let go of her and said with a smile, "You can go back now. Something big is going to happen." The Sun Saint Daughter felt a bit of reluctance in her heart, but she also understood that something big had happened. After all, the Sun God Shrine Saint's son had died here. After the Sun Saintess returned, the news spread. First of all, that faction was incredibly terrified. With their current strength, they could not defeat the Sun faction at all. Now that the Holy Sun had died here, a huge battle would definitely break out. The Sun God faction was infuriated because that was the Sun Saint's son, the person most favored by the 3 godly spirits. He was the most respected person in the Sun God faction. Even though they did not know why their Holy Son had gone there and slaughtered countless people, their Holy Son had died there, and he had been killed by that faction's city lord. They had to take revenge for this. Moreover, the Sun God faction had always wanted to attack that faction, as that faction was the biggest obstacle to the Sun God faction. That faction understood how important this matter was, and they understood how terrifying the Pantheon Temple's faction was. Even though they did not know why the Sun Saint's son had gone to their territory and slaughtered commoners, they still took the initiative to send people to apologize. They also handed over the city lord who had killed the Sun Saint's son to the Sun God faction and allowed the Sun God faction's people to punish him. A faction without great strength was just that weak. Even if others had done something wrong, they would still have to apologize. This was because they were not as strong as others. If they had great strength, who would be so weak? However, despite that faction's actions, the Sun God faction was not willing to let them off. They first sent over the city lord who had killed the Sun Saint's son and had him beheaded as a sacrifice to the heavens before continuing to attack that faction. That faction had no choice but to gather its forces and desperately defend. A massive battle erupted between the two sides, and battle cries shook the surroundings. Blood continuously sprayed everywhere as people continuously died. The scene was incredibly tragic. Zhao Fu, who was hidden in the air, once again smiled and disappeared, heading towards his final target. The final target was a faction called the Fire God faction. It had about 500 million people and 40 million soldiers. It also had 5 godly spirits and was quite powerful. Next to it was a faction called the Star God faction. It had about 500 million people and 40 million soldiers. It also had 5 godly spirits, and it was also quite powerful. Their faction strength was about the same, and they often had all sorts of conflicts. There was great hatred between the two sides, but neither side could do anything to the other. In actuality, these two factions did not have much enmity towards the Pantheon Temple, but in order to mislead the public, they still acted against these two factions. After all, if they only acted against factions that had great enmity towards the Pantheon Temple, it would be too obvious, and everyone would be able to guess who had done it. There is also another reason why Zhao Fu chose to act against these factions. Zhao Fu had heard that the Star God faction had assassinated an important figure in the Fire God faction. Even though it had not succeeded, the two factions were filled with the smell of gunpowder and could explode at any time. Zhao Fu was the one who had come to light the fire. Since the Star God faction had assassinated an important figure in the Fire God faction, Zhao Fu could control a few people from the Fire God faction and have them go to the Star God faction to assassinate an important figure. That way, the two factions would go to war without needing to do anything. After making this plan, Zhao Fu went to the Fire God faction and did some research. He found a few people who were not too high or too low in status, but they were quite famous. There were 6 people in total, 5 men and 1 woman. They were quite powerful to ordinary people, but to Zhao Fu, they were quite weak. They could not resist and were controlled by Zhao Fu's demonic qi. Bringing the 6 people, Zhao Fu quickly arrived at the Star God faction. The target that Zhao Fu wanted to assassinate had also been investigated. It was a relatively easy target. He was a priest and was very old, in his 80s. He had quite a bit of prestige in the Star God faction. It was broad daylight, so it was not convenient for Zhao Fu to act, so he waited until night. That night, black clouds covered the sky, and it was drizzling. The light was dim, and the sound was muffled. It was a good time to act. Chapter 1896. At that moment, a young man walked in. He was wearing a black robe with stars embroidered on it, and he was a young priest. "Grandpa Priest, it's so late, you should rest early." The young man looked at the elderly man and gave a caring smile. The elderly man gave a gentle smile as he said, "Wait a bit, I'll finish writing soon. This is a bit of my comprehension, and it can help you young priests. After I die, the great star god will need you to spread his faith." Hearing this, the young man couldn't help but look sad because the elderly man indeed didn't have much time left. The elderly man wasn't very powerful, so his lifespan was limited. Moreover, the elderly man had contracted an illness, so he wanted to use the last moments of his life to do something useful to others and to the godly spirit. It was because of this that he was respected by all priests. "Grandpa Priest, the godly spirit is so powerful, and they can use miracles to cure your illness. You'll be fine," the young man said sincerely. The elderly man smiled as he said, "There's no need to trouble yourself, great star god. I've lived for so long, and I'm content." The young man looked quite uncomfortable, and his eyes flickered with tears. The elderly man smiled as he said, "All right, I'll rest in a bit. It's getting late, so you should rest first." The young man shook his head as he said, "I'll stay with Grandpa Priest for now. I'll rest after Grandpa Priest sleeps." Seeing this, the elderly man couldn't do anything. He smiled as he had the young man sit on a chair next to him, and he continued to write. By now, Zhao Fu had already arrived outside the room. Looking at the guards outside, he said to the people behind him, "Kill them." The people behind Zhao Fu had cold expressions and were under Zhao Fu's control. They did not hesitate, as they quickly rushed towards the guards. The divine guard's complexion changed. He immediately shouted, "Enemies!" Then, with his weapon in hand, he charged towards the group. However, the guard were evidently not a match for Zhao Fu and his people, and they were directly killed, causing pitiful cries to fill the night sky. Hearing the pitiful cries outside, the elderly man's expression fell. The young man next to him looked terrified, and his body trembled. He didn't have any strength left, and if the enemies rushed in, he would definitely die. The old priest understood that those people were coming for him, so he quickly made a decision. He kindly smiled and said to the young man, "Don't be afraid. Hide under the bed, and remember not to come out no matter what happens." The youth said worriedly, "What about you, Grandpa Priest?" The old shaman smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about me. Hurry up and hide under the bed, or else it'll be too late." Hearing this, the young man could only hide under the bed in fear. Bang! The door was kicked open and a few masked men barged in, looking at the old shaman with murderous intent. The old shaman sat on the chair with a calm expression. There was no fear in his eyes as he looked at those people calmly. "Who are you people?" Those people didn't say anything. One of them slashed out with a saber, and a huge saber light flew out, directly chopping off the old shaman's head. Blood spurted out, and the old shaman's corpse lay on the table. Then, a man walked forward and picked up the head that had rolled to the ground. The young man hid under the bed and watched this scene with his own eyes. Tears of pain flowed from his eyes. At the same time, he covered his mouth in fear, not daring to make a sound. His body was trembling, afraid that he would be discovered and that he would be killed. At that moment, the people that Zhao Fu controlled had already discovered the young man. However, he wanted to leave a witness, so he didn't kill the young man and control them to leave with the old shaman's head. At that moment, countless soldiers charged over. Zhao Fu controlled a few people to slow down so that the soldiers could catch up. He even held the old shaman's head in his hands for the soldiers to see. The soldiers looked at the old shaman's head that they usually respected and furiously charged at those people. Zhao Fu controlled those people to kill many soldiers, but more and more soldiers rushed over and joined the battle. In the end, those people that Zhao Fu controlled couldn't hold them off and died at the hands of the soldiers. A valiant-looking young man walked over and angrily walked over to those people's corpses and took off the cloth on their faces. The young man was quite familiar with these people. They were from the Fire God faction. At that moment, the tear-stained young man was brought over. He furiously pointed at those people and said, "They killed Grandpa Priest." This matter was quickly reported to the higher-ups of the Star God faction. These bastards, they actually dared to attack a powerless old man. They're simply animals. If they have the guts, come at me. AI. Back then, I was opposed to assassinations. Now, the assassination failed, and my own people were assassinated. We actually had a better target, but because he was too young, we changed our target. We couldn't be lenient back then. Now, they're not holding back at all. That old shaman is deeply respected and loved by our people. Now that they know he's been killed, the people and generals all want to avenge him. Let's fight. This war will break out sooner or later. It's better to start as soon as possible. The Fire God faction also received the news. Who sent people to do this? They should be heavily rewarded. I've wanted to do this for a long time. It's a bit strange. Why haven't I heard any news? Who made such a big decision? It doesn't matter who did it. I've already received news that the Star God faction has mobilized a large number of troops to fight against us. Therefore, we must start preparing to face the Star God faction's attack. AI, I don't know how many people will die in this battle. Let's fight. What's there to be afraid of? I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Either the Fire God faction or the Star God faction will die. Let's not waste any more words. That Star God force is already attacking. Let's start fighting. The Star God faction brought countless soldiers and fiercely attacked the Fire God faction. The Fire God faction also mobilized countless soldiers to guard the city walls, emitting a powerful aura. Boom! The two enormous auras collided. Both sides engaged in a fierce fight. Blood splattered and screams sounded. People died one after another, shocking the surroundings. Hidden in the void, Zhao Fu couldn't help but smile. He disappeared and returned to the Pantheon Palace. Chapter 1897. The first piece of news was that the battle between the Mountain God faction and the Bear God faction was not very intense. Halfway through the battle, a third party had intervened, seemingly wanting to heavily injure the two factions and forced them to stop while resisting the third party's attack. Even though the battle between the Mountain God faction and the Bear God faction was not intense, this did not disappoint Zhao Fu. Instead, he was pleasantly surprised. This was a three-way battle, and it was of a larger scale with more people. Moreover, they could not focus on Pantheon right now. The second piece of news was that the Sun God faction had successfully destroyed that faction and devoured a large area of territory and countless people. Now, its strength was terrifying, and its population had reached 900 million. They had not increased the number of godly spirits. Of the original godly spirits, 3 had died, and 3 had escaped. That faction had been removed. At this moment, the Sun God faction was the most terrifying, and the surrounding factions were on guard. They turned their attention to the Sun God faction and no longer paid attention to Pantheon. This was because it was evident that the Sun God faction was more of a threat, and the various factions had gathered to discuss how to deal with the terrifying Sun God faction. The third piece of news was about the battle between the Fire God faction and the Star God faction. The Star God faction was on the offensive side, and after suffering some casualties, they could only temporarily stop attacking and think of another way to attack. At this time, someone suggested allying with other factions to attack the Fire God faction, so they sent out a few messengers to the nearby factions. The Pantheon Temple was their best choice, so they immediately sent people to the Pantheon Temple, hoping to ask for help from the Pantheon Temple. Zhao Fu was the most surprised about this. He had never thought that after sowing discord between the two sides, there would still be people who wanted to ally with him. Now, Zhao Fu had 2 choices. The first was to refuse and maintain Pantheon's peaceful and friendly appearance, and the second was to agree and take the opportunity to attack the Fire God faction to obtain some benefits. Of the 2 choices, it was obvious that the second was better, as he could obtain benefits and was invited rather than actively participating. Zhao Fu immediately made a decision, but he did not directly agree. He still had to pretend to be peaceful and kind, and he first met with the messengers sent by the Star God faction. Within the palace, Zhao Fu sat at the top while a beautiful middle-aged woman stood below. She had a pretty face and silver hair, and she had a slim figure. She wore a black robe with stars embroidered on it and gave off a mysterious aura. She looked similar to the young man beside the old shaman. This beautiful woman should be the young man's mother. "Greetings, Divine Master." The beautiful woman gave a trace of a smile and respectfully bowed to Zhao Fu. She was only a priestess, and facing such a terrifying, godly spirit, she had to be respectful. A trace of a smile appeared on Zhao Fu's face. Even though he understood their goal, Zhao Fu still feigned ignorance and asked, "What business does your Star God force have?" The woman inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. She felt that the legendary Pantheon God Lord was not that terrifying. He said with a smile, "The great Star God sent me here to establish a friendly alliance with the Pantheon Temple." He also asked the Pantheon Temple to send troops to attack the nearby Fire God forces. After that, all the population and resources will be distributed equally. Zhao Fu smiled as he replied, "The Pantheon God Palace has announced to the outside world that it wants to get along peacefully. If we agree to your request and attack the Fire God faction, that won't be too good." Hearing that Zhao Fu did not refuse, the beautiful woman felt quite delighted and said, "Divine Master, you're helping your friend this time. This time, you're helping your friend. It's a legitimate action. No one will say anything." Zhao Fu looked quite hesitant. The beautiful woman smiled as she said, "If we can destroy the Fire God faction, the Pantheon God Palace can take 60% of the population. Moreover, in order to become friends with the Pantheon God Palace, the glorious Star God has ordered people to bring many gifts." Following this, the beautiful woman had people carry over 10 or so chests of treasures and 10 or so beautiful women. The beautiful woman smiled as she said, "We've carefully selected these treasures and women to present to the Divine Master. This shows our sincerity." Zhao Fu looked at the treasures and women and naturally did not pay much attention to them. His gaze fell on the beautiful woman. She seemed to have some status among the Star God faction's priests. As such, he smiled as he said, "Are you one of the gifts? If you are, I can consider forming an alliance with the Star God faction and sending troops to help you attack the Fire God faction." The beautiful woman looked quite surprised. She had never thought that Zhao Fu would be interested in her. Thinking about it for the Star God and to defeat the Fire God faction, the beautiful woman smiled and nodded. "If the Divine Master wants me, I'm willing to offer myself to the Divine Master." Zhao Fu gave a trace of an evil smile as he said, "Then come with me." The beautiful woman had never thought that Zhao Fu would be in such a hurry to want her now. Her face became slightly red as she nodded and followed Zhao Fu to her room. Zhao Fu stood in front of her and said in a gentle tone, "What is your name?" The beautiful woman understood what was going to happen, and her face became slightly red as she replied, "Xing Spirit Moon." Zhao Fu smiled and nodded. Clanging sounds rang out as two chains shot out and bound Xing's Spirit Moon's hands. He then pulled them together and hung the beautiful woman's body in the air. Xing's Spirit Moon's heart tightened and did not know what Zhao Fu wanted to do. She immediately asked, "Divine Master, didn't you want me to serve you? Why are you doing this to me?" Zhao Fu did not reply to her and stretched out a hand. 6 waves of demonic qi flowed out before Zhao Fu pressed his hand against Xing Spirit Moon's abdomen, and a massive amount of 6 desires demonic qi flowed in. Xing Lingwei immediately let out an uncontrollable gasp. Her face turned red, and her beautiful eyes were covered with a layer of mist. Zhao Fu smiled as he said, "Whenever you're willing to submit to me, you'll stop." Xing Spirit Moon's face became red as she angrily said, "You're the Celestial God Palace's Divine Master. How can you use such despicable methods on me?" Zhao Fu lightly laughed and ignored her words. He waved his hand, and a wave of energy tore off her clothes, revealing her body to Zhao Fu. Xing Spirit Moon felt quite ashamed, and her face became even redder. Zhao Fu went to a chair and looked through the various reports, allowing Xing's Spirit Moon to twist and turn and give out alluring sounds. Chapter 1898. Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile as he came in front of Star's Spirit Moon and waved his hand, causing the 2 chains to loosen. Star's Spirit Moon's body fell to the ground, and Zhao Fu hugged her, not letting her fall to the ground. Star's Spirit Moon was in Zhao Fu's embrace, and sensing Zhao Fu's aura, she seemed to lose control and started to kiss Zhao Fu. Only after Zhao Fu sealed the 6 desires demonic qi did she return to normal. However, now that Star Spirit Moon had returned to normal, she still tightly hugged Zhao Fu and did not want to let go, as if Zhao Fu's body had some sort of magical power. Even though Star Spirit Moon was hugging Zhao Fu, she still said angrily, "You bastard, using such a despicable method to make others submit to you. Can't you use other methods? Also, do you often do this?" Zhao Fu smiled as he lifted Star Spirit Moon's chin. "It's easier and more convenient this way. For example, people like you who have high faith in godly spirits won't just last for an hour." Star Spirit Moon's face became red and she glared at him. "It's not my problem. It's that power of yours that's too abnormal. Otherwise, I definitely wouldn't have betrayed the Star God." Zhao Fu smiled as he said, "It's just a godly spirit. After I destroy the Star God faction, I'll make you a godly spirit." Star Spirit Moon said in surprise, "Really?" To people in the godly spirit world, becoming a god was their greatest wish and their lifelong pursuit. Zhao Fu looked at her beautiful face and smiled as he said, "Do you think I'm a liar?" Star Spirit Moon happily kissed Zhao Fu. "I believe you. Let me serve you now." Zhao Fu smiled as he cut her off. "There's no need to be like this. Put on your clothes and go back. Then report to me about the Star God faction. I'll immediately send troops to attack the Fire God faction with your Star God faction." Star Spirit Moon said flirtatiously, "Now that the 2 sides have stopped fighting, you can pamper me once. There's still time, so there's no need to rush." Zhao Fu shook his head and said no. Star Spirit Moon felt quite disappointed and could only let go of Zhao Fu. She put on her clothes and bitterly looked at Zhao Fu, saying, "Then I'll be going." Zhao Fu smiled and nodded. Star Spirit Moon turned and left, and Zhao Fu gave the order to gather his troops. After Star God faction heard that Pantheon was willing to ally with them and attack the Star faction, they could not help but be overjoyed. Now that the Pantheon Temple had joined them, they might be able to annihilate the Fire God faction and end their long-standing grievances. When the Fire God faction learned about this faction, they could not help but reveal a look of fear. They also understood that if the Star God faction and Pantheon worked together, they definitely would not be able to stop them, so they also wanted to ally with the surrounding factions. However, the God faction was of the Fu of Fu. And they did not want of the God faction. Of Sunday, Zhao Fu directly rejected them, because the benefits of attacking Fire God faction would be greater. This time, Zhao Fu had mobilized more than 30 million soldiers. With an enormous and powerful aura, they attacked Fire God faction from the side. Fire God faction had a population of 500 million and a military strength of 40 million, while Star God faction had about the same strength as him. Star God faction's attacking force had also reached 30 million, leaving 10 million to defend. Hua Er's force had also used 30 million to defend against Star God, while the rest of the force was defending in other directions. Right now, facing the Pantheon Palace's 30 million troops, the Fire Divine Palace could only pull out 10 million troops from the battlefield with the Star God force, and also pull out some troops from other directions. Adding the urgently recruited militia, the number of troops had reached 20 million. At this time, Fire God faction had 20 million troops against Star God faction and 20 million against Pantheon. Right now, Star God side was more advantageous. Pantheon, on the other hand, was more advantageous than Star God faction. This side was not the main force, and their preparations were lacking. The battle quickly began. Star God knew that this was the best time to extinguish Fire God faction, so he did not want to waste any time and attack Fire God faction. Boom, 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 boom. The sounds of explosions rang out continuously as the soldiers of both sides fought fiercely. Screams and cries of battle rang out unceasingly as blood splattered everywhere. More and more people died, covering the ground. Zhao Fu's side also launched an attack. Swish, swish, swish. Arrows shot towards the city walls with terrifying force. The densely packed arrows whistled through the air, not only causing people to feel a sense of fear, it was as if no one could survive under the arrows. On Fire God's side, there were only two gods in charge of commanding the battle. One of them was a man, and the other was a woman, with fiery hair and fiery eyes. The man had a sturdy figure, and the woman had a fiery hot figure. Facing the Pantheon Palace's arrows, the two godly spirits on the Fire God faction's side stretched out a hand, and a massive godly spirit shot into the sky. Heaven and earth power continuously gathered, causing the sky to become a fiery color and fiery runes to appear on the walls. Boundless heat spread out, and a fiery curtain of light fell down, blocking the arrows that were shot over. Some of the Vulcan soldiers on the city wall raised their hands, causing the surrounding fire elements to continuously gather and form fireballs. Then, they threw the fireballs towards the Pantheon soldiers who were rushing over at high speed. The countless fireballs brought with them waves of heat as they flew towards the Pantheon soldiers, creating a terrifying scene. Bang, bang, bang. The charging Pantheon soldiers gave off a platinum aura that condensed in front of them, forming a massive platinum energy barrier. As the fireballs hit the barrier, they exploded, causing sparks to fly everywhere. The Pantheon soldiers gave off a powerful aura as they flooded towards the city walls, seeming unstoppable. The two godly spirits on Fire God's side looked quite serious. Even though Pantheon had not been established for long, it did not seem weak at all. The two godly spirits immediately gave orders, and the soldiers on the city walls exploded out with auras as their bodies gave off boundless fiery aura. The fiery aura gathered in the air and formed massive fireballs. The fireballs gave off searing heat and lined up in a row, giving off shocking heat. Boom, boom, boom. The fireballs gave off massive power as they quickly shot towards the defensive barrier, leaving behind fiery trails. Bang, bang, bang. The huge fireballs collided with the defensive barrier and exploded. A huge explosive power spread out, causing the sturdy platinum defensive barrier to shatter. Swish, swish, swish. Fire god soldiers grasped this opportunity, and arrows containing immense force shot towards the Pantheon Palace's soldiers with a terrifying aura. Chi, chi. Chapter 1899. At the same time, some Pantheon soldiers used their weapons to deflect the incoming arrows and used their shields to block. After suppressing the Pantheon army's momentum, the two godly spirits and the commander gave a trace of a smile. What happened next caused the two godly spirits' expressions to fall. Countless traces of platinum aura once again rose up from the Pantheon army's bodies. The platinum aura continuously condensed in the air, forming 10 or so meter-long platinum spears that gave off terrifying auras, making people feel quite terrified. Boom, boom, boom. The platinum-colored spears shot out, bringing with them immense, piercing power as they shot towards the defensive walls. They were incredibly fast, drawing out platinum-colored arcs in the air. Bang, bang, the fiery barrier in front of the defensive walls was pierced through by the spears, turning into countless motes of fiery light and dissipating, while the spears continued to shoot towards the defensive walls. Chi, chi, chi. The spears gave off shocking power as they pierced through people's bodies. Some shield-wielding soldiers' bodies and shields were even pierced through, causing blood to fly everywhere and howls to continuously sound out. The defensive walls were now covered with silver spears, creating a shocking scene. It was unknown just how many people had died on the defensive walls. By now, the spears had turned into countless traces of platinum aura and dissipated. The Pantheon soldiers continued to rush towards the defensive walls and quickly reached the bottom of the defensive walls. They took out ladders and flying bolts and started to attack. The two godly spirits' expressions were quite unsightly as they gave the order to counterattack. They continuously shot arrows at the Pantheon soldiers and used heavy objects to hit the Pantheon soldiers, slashing out sharp lights. Swish, swish, swish! The Pantheon soldiers shot out a wave of powerful arrows, piercing through the fire god army soldiers' bodies. The Pantheon soldiers used this wave of suppression to reach the defensive walls and start to fight with the fire god army soldiers. A fire god palace soldier vigorously stabbed out with his spear, giving off terrifying power as he pierced through a Pantheon god palace soldier's body. However, another Pantheon god palace soldier vigorously swung his sword, chopping off the fire god palace soldier's head. A Pantheon soldier slashed out with his saber, sending out a sharp saber light that sent a fire god soldier flying. Another Pantheon soldier stabbed out with his spear, piercing through a fire god soldier's throat. A fire god palace soldier loudly roared as he swung out with his saber, sending a Pantheon palace soldier flying. Another Pantheon palace soldier wielded a spear and stabbed the fire god palace soldier's body. Not only did fire god side not have as many people as Pantheon, but their combat power was also inferior. Moreover, Pantheon had the power to restrain them. As a result, Fire God side was no match for Pantheon. Fire God soldiers were constantly being killed, and it was clear that they were on the losing side. Seeing that the Fire God army had been completely suppressed, Zhao Fu instantly disappeared and appeared in front of the two fire gods. Boom! A terrifying aura exploded out from Zhao Fu's body, forming a powerful gale that spread out. Sensing this power, the two fire gods' expressions fell. Zhao Fu held the Emperor Killing Sword and gave a cold smile as he slashed out, sending out a sharp black sword light towards the two godly spirits. The two godly spirits exploded out with divine power and used their weapons to block in front of them. Bang! Bang! The two of them were forced back 10 or so meters, and their expressions became even more unsightly as they felt that Zhao Fu's power was simply too terrifying. Zhao Fu held the sword and gave off a massive aura as he rushed in front of the female fire god. A massive wave of power entered the sword, causing it to give off an intense sword light. Zhao Fu raised the sword and vigorously slashed out, giving off a destructive power. The female fire god felt quite startled and sent her fire god power into the sword. The sword gave off boundless fiery light as she vigorously slashed toward Zhao Fu. Bang! The two swords collided with terrifying power, resulting in a massive sound. However, the female fire god was evidently not a match for Zhao Fu, and the Emperor Killing Sword gave off an intense black light as it slashed the female fire god to the ground, opening up a large crater. The male fire god held his spear and gave off a fiery aura as he furiously rushed at Zhao Fu. He vigorously stabbed out with his spear, sending out a searing spear light towards Zhao Fu's back. Zhao Fu spun and slashed out, destroying the spear light before slashing out again, sending out an enormous black sword light with shocking power. The male fire god's expression fell, and he put the spear in front of him a block. Bang! The massive black sword light slammed into the spear, resulting in an explosion as the male fire god was sent flying. Zhao Fu turned into a black ray of light and rushed up. The male fire god stopped himself and vigorously stabbed his spear toward Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu gave a trace of a cold smile as he stretched out his hand and grabbed the spear before vigorously slashing out with his sword. A sharp black sword light cut the fire god's body in half, causing blood to fly everywhere. Boom! A massive wave of heat exploded out as the female fire god appeared behind Zhao Fu. She raised her sword, which was covered in fiery flames. She vigorously slashed out, sending out an enormous fiery sword light that seemed to be able to incinerate everything as it slashed toward Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu turned and blocked with his sword, and the powerful sword light slashed against Zhao Fu's sword, sending Zhao Fu flying back 10 or so meters. However, in the next moment, Zhao Fu looked at the female fire god and gave a trace of a cold smile. The golden pupil in Zhao Fu's left eye quickly spun, and chains shot out from all directions, bringing with them immense power as they shot towards the fire goddess. The female fire god looked quite flustered as she swung her sword, cutting apart the incoming chains. However, there were simply too many chains, and in the end, she was bound in the air by the countless chains. Zhao Fu flew in front of her. The female fire god furiously glared at Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile as he pinched the female fire god's chin and looked at her beautiful face as he said domineeringly, "You're mine now." The female fire god furiously roared, "Who's that? You bastard, I'll definitely kill you." Zhao Fu ignored the female fire god's words, and a massive wave of 6 desires demonic chi flowed out of his hand and flowed into the female fire god's body. The female fire god's face immediately became red, and Zhao Fu quickly sealed the 6 desires demonic chi. He planned to properly discipline the female fire god after he returned. Following this, Zhao Fu grabbed out with his hand, and a formless energy took out the male fire god's divinity. By now, the battle was almost over. The fire god soldiers were not a match for the Pantheon Palace's soldiers from the very beginning and were suppressed by them. Chapter 1900. His gaze turned towards another battlefield. In the sky, the star god faction's 5 godly spirits were attacking the 3 fire gods. Facing the combined attacks of the 5 star gods, the fire gods were gradually losing ground. Originally, their strength had been about the same, but the star god faction had numerical advantage, suppressing them. The battle on the ground was also quite intense. This was the main force of the 2 factions, so the battle was naturally quite terrifying. A fire god soldier held a spear and forcefully pierced through a star god soldier's body. A fire god soldier swung his saber and sent a star god soldier flying. A fire god soldier kicked a star god soldier away. A star god soldier swung his spear and sent a fire god soldier flying. A star god soldier swung his sword and cut off a fire god soldier's head, while a star god soldier split a fire god soldier in half with a saber. The star god army gradually gained the upper hand. More and more soldiers attacked, and the fire god soldiers gradually could not hold on anymore. After all, they had 10 million more soldiers than the fire god army. At this moment, news of the other side's city wall being breached came. The three fire gods understood that they had lost and immediately started a run. Countless fire god soldiers heard this news and understood that the fire god faction was about to be destroyed by the two factions. There was no point in continuing to fight, so they did not hesitate and ran. The fire god army's defenses completely collapsed, and countless star god soldiers attacked the city wall, announcing the victory of this battle. The five-star gods chased after the three fire gods. There was so much hatred between the two sides, and they did not want to let these three disasters escape. In the end, after another large battle, one fire god died, and two fire gods escaped with heavy injuries. One of the star gods was quite heavily injured, but the other godly spirits were fine. The Pantheon army had already broken into the city wall from the other side, quickly taking down region after region like a white flood. Countless commoners looked at the holy and dignified soldiers in white armor and felt a wave of fear, and they all knelt on the ground in submission. The commoners living in the godly spirit world knew that the gods needed faith. As long as they submitted, they would not die, so they obediently submitted. They had experienced this countless times. However, there were also fanatics who resisted with all their might, wanting to continue protecting the fire god. Zhao Fu did not show any mercy to these people and directly killed them, not even sparing their families and children. In fact, some of the people who resisted intensely were even punished by Zhao Fu. This divine punishment was to hang people in midair and use a knife to cut a cross on their bodies. This cross was a bit deep, but it did not cut open their chests. Then, a torch was used to burn the wound, forming a scorched black cross. In the end, these people would slowly and painfully die from their injuries, letting out mournful screams. When the commoners saw how bloody and cruel the Pantheon Divine Hall was, they felt fear. They dared not resist, obediently submitting to the Pantheon Divine Hall. Zhao Fu's Pantheon Palace was also the first to attack the Fire Divine Palace, followed by the soldiers of the Star God Power. The five-star gods had also arrived, and they were all smiling as they looked at Zhao Fu, who was standing in the middle of the hall. This time, it was all thanks to the help of the Pantheon Palace that they were able to eliminate the Fire God, their greatest enemy. Without the Pantheon Palace, it would have been very difficult for them to break through the city walls. They were also somewhat grateful to the Pantheon Palace. Zhao Fu smiled as he looked at the four men and one woman in front of him. Congratulations on destroying the Fire God Power. A middle-aged man said, gratefully with a face full of smiles, "This time, it's all thanks to the help of the Pantheon Palace. From now on, the Star God Power will be the best friend of the Pantheon Palace. If you need anything in the future, we will also help you." Zhao Fu said with a smile, "Since we are all best friends, you don't have to thank us. The Pantheon Palace will also be your most beneficial helper." The middle-aged man revealed a smile. "We will hold a celebratory banquet later. I hope that the God Lord will attend. We will also thank you properly." Zhao Fu smiled and nodded. The middle-aged man continued to smile and said, "Now, let's discuss the distribution of the Fire God Power, so as to not hurt our relationship." Zhao Fu nodded. According to the previous agreement, the Pantheon Palace would take 60% and the Star God Power would take 40%. However, because the Pantheon Palace had broken through the Fire God Power's defenses relatively quickly, the Star God Power was held back by the Fire God Power. Therefore, the Fire God Power had taken more areas, taking 70%. Zhao Fu made a promise and immediately ordered people to withdraw from the occupied areas. In order to deepen the relationship between the two sides, Zhao Fu also proposed to split the Fire God Power equally. The five-star gods were also somewhat surprised. They did not expect Zhao Fu to be so generous. Not only did he withdraw from the occupied areas, but he was also willing to split it equally. They could not help but feel happy and felt that cooperating with the Pantheon Palace was not bad. The relationship between the two sides could not help but become much closer. However, they did not know that Zhao Fu had already classified the Star God power as his own. When the time came, he could take it down. Now that these things were given to the Star God power, they would still be in his hands in the future. At this moment, Zhao Fu looked at the beautiful and slender Star God with a pale face. He had some thoughts in his heart and asked in concern, "This Star God's face is pale. Are you injured?" The beautiful Star God smiled and said, "When I killed the Fire God, I was ambushed by the Fire God before his death and suffered some injuries. I will be fine after a few days of rest." Zhao Fu said with a smile, "I have a healing ability that can quickly heal injuries. How about I help you heal your injuries now?" The beautiful woman looked at the other star gods. She did not completely trust Zhao Fu and did not treat Zhao Fu as one of them. A young star god smiled. "Since the Divine Master has that ability, let the Divine Master heal me." The few of them were at the side and felt that there should be no problems. If there were problems, they would immediately notice. Hearing this, the beautiful woman could not refuse and gave a trace of a smile. "Thank you, Divine Master." Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile and had the beautiful woman sit on a chair next to him. He placed his hand on her back, and a massive wave of energy flowed into her body, causing her injuries to quickly heal and her face to become rosy again. Following this, Zhao Fu withdrew his hand incredibly quickly, and no one noticed anything strange. However, Zhao Fu had already planted a 6th desire demon into the beautiful woman's body. Seeing how quickly the beautiful woman recovered, the surrounding people looked quite surprised and felt that Zhao Fu's abilities were quite powerful. The beautiful woman did not feel anything wrong with her body and smiled at Zhao Fu. She felt that she had wronged him and said apologetically, "Thank you." Chapter 1901. Following this, Zhao Fu took care of the celebratory banquet before returning to the 10,000 God Palace to gather everyone's opinions on this matter. Right now, Zhao Fu was quite concerned about what everyone else thought of him. If there was a better way to resolve this, Zhao Fu did not want to be surrounded and attacked. Before, he had no choice but to choose that path. This time, Pantheon had been invited to help the Star God destroy the Fire God, so the other factions had nothing to say. After all, they had not taken the initiative to start a war, so Pantheon's willingness to get along with the other factions had been fulfilled. Thinking about this, Zhao Fu could not help but smile. Pantheon could take the path of an alliance, turning enemies into friends and slowly corroding them before devouring them. Those who were unwilling to form an alliance would also be viewed as enemies, and Pantheon could join forces with other godly spirits to attack them. In the end, they would divide the factions evenly, and many factions would be interested. Zhao Fu had wanted to discuss this with the Star God faction's godly spirits, as they were Pantheon's first ally. However, if he said this out loud, wouldn't it be too obvious? After thinking about it, Pantheon decided that it would be better for the other factions to bring this up themselves. Pantheon had obtained roughly 200 million people from this war. Adding on the previous population, Pantheon's population had reached 800 million, which was a bit stronger than before. Zhao Fu looked ahead at the Fire God, who was hanging in the air and had a red face and was twisting her body. Zhao Fu gave a trace of smile as he said, "Your Fire God faction has already perished. Submitting to me is where you belong. After you join the Pantheon Palace, I won't mistreat you. Your treatment will definitely be better than before." The Fire God glared at Zhao Fu angrily and did not say anything. At that moment, the door was pushed open and a cloaked figure walked in. From her figure, it seemed to be a woman. It was the beautiful Star God. She looked at the Fire God hanging in the air and lifted her hood. Her face was red as she looked at Zhao Fu with a trace of anger. "You really are a despicable, shameless, and lowly person." After the banquet ended, Zhao Fu had activated the Six Desires demonic seed in the star god's body and controlled it. Zhao Fu had been thinking about this before. Not only had he left a chess piece in the star god faction, but if he could subdue a godly spirit, he would be able to easily control the star god faction in the future. I controlled you here. As for my purpose, I don't need to say more. Are you willing to submit to me? Zhao Fu said with a trace of smile. The beautiful star god coldly harumphed and said, "Do you think I'll betray the other star gods and submit to you?" Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile and did not say anything. He waved his hand, and two chains shot out, binding up the elegant star god's hands and hanging her up. He then waved his hand, and a wave of energy tore her clothes apart, revealing her body. In the end, she grabbed out with her hand, and countless traces of Six Desires demonic chi flowed out from the beautiful star god's body. The intense feeling caused the beautiful star god to moan before her face became bright red and she started to twist in the air. The fire god looked at the star god and understood what she was feeling because she was also suffering. Zhao Fu did not continue to do anything and looked back at the booklet in front of him. 2 hours later, the two goddesses could not withstand Zhao Fu's torture and agreed to submit to Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu smiled and waved his hand to remove the chains binding them. The two goddesses landed on the ground and leapt into Zhao Fu's embrace as Zhao Fu sealed the Six Desires demonic chi within their bodies. The two goddesses returned to normal, and the beautiful star god's face became red as she angrily pounded Zhao Fu's chest with her hands and said, "You perverted thief." The fire god lay in Zhao Fu's embrace and lightly harumphed. "Why aren't you doting on us?" Zhao Fu lightly laughed as he hugged the two goddesses and said, "Cultivation technique restrictions. Also, don't worry. Now that you've submitted to me, I won't mistreat you." The fire god's expression eased, and she lightly nodded as she hugged Zhao Fu and rested her head on Zhao Fu's shoulder. The star god lay in Zhao Fu's embrace and looked at Zhao Fu as she said softly, "Even though I've submitted to you, as long as you promise not to harm the other star gods, I'll be yours in the future." Zhao Fu smiled as he nodded. "If it's not necessary, I won't harm them. Also, after you go back, you need to strengthen your control over your faction so that the Pantheon God Palace can devour the Star God faction in the future." The Star God gave a trace of a smile as she replied softly, Following this, Zhao Fu hugged the two goddesses and started to look through the booklet. The two goddesses happily smiled as they chatted with Zhao Fu. After a while, the fire god smiled and asked, "Husband, just who are you? Just who are you? What's your purpose for coming here?" The star god curiously smiled as she asked, "That's right. With husband's abilities, you definitely aren't an ordinary person. So why have you come to a remote place like ours?" Zhao Fu smiled as he replied, "I'll tell you who I am in the future. As for my purpose here, of course, it's to unify all of the godly spirit factions and establish a powerful faction that can rule over all gods." The two goddesses looked at Zhao Fu in shock. They had never thought that Zhao Fu's ambitions would be so great. He was not satisfied with just becoming a powerful faction and wanted to unify all of the factions here. However, with Zhao Fu's abilities, the two goddesses believed that Zhao Fu would be able to do this. Following this, Zhao Fu had the star god go back to avoid being seen through by others. At the same time, he had the fire god put on his clothes and come to the palace to discuss the Pantheon God Palace's future plans with everyone else. Zhao Fu told everyone about his plan, which was to unite all of the factions and turn enemies into friends. They could also destroy some enemies and increase their own strength. Everyone was quite supportive of Zhao Fu's plan, but was not good for the Pantheon God Palace to be the first to say this. It was best to let others take the initiative. After everyone's discussion, they came up with an idea. It was not that the sun god's power was quite terrifying, but the weaker factions were quite afraid. This was the condition for establishing the alliance. After going through the detailed plan, Zhao Fu started to act. Chapter 1902. Moreover, Zhao Fu also let Pantheon continue to choose various gifts and send them to various forces to continue to maintain Pantheon's righteous and bright image. The most important thing was to indirectly remind them that they could form an alliance with Pantheon. Pantheon could help them through difficulties or give them support. The focus was on the forces around Sun God because they were under great threat. If there was no threat and no difficulties, who would seek help from you and would not form an alliance with you? The forces around Sun God received the gifts from Pantheon and the message from Pantheon. They also gathered together to discuss. Now that Sun God's faction has swallowed such a large force, no one around is a match for it. Only by joining forces can we resist it. Yeah, that force is the biggest obstacle for Sun God's faction. Now that the biggest obstacle has been cleared, it will definitely attack us. We can't beat it, so we can only join forces. Do you think Pantheon is reliable? It just helped Star God destroy Fire God's faction. I heard that it is very strong. If it joins us, we will be even stronger and don't have to worry about Sun God's faction. I think it's possible. Although we have a lot of people, we don't have the strength. We need the support of a powerful force. I heard you say it all very well, but will Pantheon help us for no reason? I don't believe that Pantheon is that good. I agree with that, but Pantheon has already expressed that they can help us. Although I don't know for what purpose, we can use them. It won't do us any harm. Okay, then let's send someone to Pantheon to see if they want to ally with us. Zhao Fu looked at the envoys sent by various forces and could not help but feel happy. As he expected, as soon as he mentioned something, they came running and took the initiative to talk about an alliance. Although he was happy, Zhao Fu pretended to be in a bit of a dilemma. Pantheon promised to help you, but joining forces against some force is somewhat inconsistent with the main purpose of getting along peacefully. The envoys said to themselves, if Pantheon really wanted peace, then you wouldn't have helped Star God's faction destroy Fire God. Pantheon also agreed as soon as Star God asked. At the same time, they also heard that Zhao Fu did not completely refuse, so they said with a smile, right now, the Sun God's power is too strong and has seriously threatened us. It is a good thing that the Pantheon Temple is helping us. It is in line with the main purpose of the Pantheon Temple. Yeah, that Sun God faction is overbearing and unreasonable. After eliminating that faction, they will make a move on us. Pantheon helping weak factions like us should be a great thing. Everyone will praise Pantheon's noble and kind character. Pantheon is such a righteous, bright, kind, and friendly force. They will definitely agree to help us when we ask for help. Also agree with what everyone said. Pantheon helping us is a righteous and kind choice. No one will slander Pantheon's reputation. If someone does, I'll be the first to object. Zhao Fu was a little disgusted by their words. However, this was also the purpose of the Pantheon Temple, so he pretended to be hesitant and finally agreed. The envoys were overjoyed and thanked the Pantheon Palace for their help. Then, Zhao Fu met with the various deities. There were a total of 15 deity factions. Some factions were relatively strong, with a population of hundreds of millions, and some are very weak, with a population of only a few million. After Zhao Fu talked with them for a while, they confirmed the matter of the alliance and discussed in detail the various matters after the alliance. First, Zhao Fu proposed that the people of the Pantheon Temple could enter the various factions at will in order to more conveniently help the various factions. Everyone felt that there was no problem. Since it was an alliance, it was acceptable to allow people from other factions to enter their territory at will. It was impossible to block others when they came to help. Zhao Fu's real intention was to make it convenient to infiltrate the various factions and send various people to the various factions to confuse people. The second requirement was that the soldiers of the Pantheon Temple could be stationed in the various factions. It was said that they could protect the various factions and respond quickly. In fact, it was to strengthen the influence of the Pantheon Temple in the various factions' armies. The various deities thought about this and did not have too many objections. They reluctantly agreed because they did not think of the consequences. However, This way, not only could the Pantheon Temple increase its influence among the residents, but could also increase its influence among the armies. As long as they controlled the higher-ups of the various factions, the entire faction would belong to the Pantheon Temple. Of course, this had to be done in secret and could not be discovered, so it would take some time. During this time, Zhao Fu could ally with them to attack other factions. This would increase their strength and also increase their influence over the various factions. Thinking to there, Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile and held a banquet with the various factions to celebrate the formation of the alliance. As soon as news spread, it caused an uproar. No one had expected the Pantheon Temple to form an alliance with the various factions. Originally, the Pantheon Temple had a population of 800 million and more than 50 million soldiers. The other 15 factions had a population of 900 million and 70 million soldiers. Together, they had a population of 7 billion and 120 million soldiers. This strength caused the alliance to become the strongest faction here. This was something that shocked everyone. For such a powerful faction to appear in such a short period of time, everyone could not help but feel quite wary. However, because it was formed by various factions, everyone was not too worried. After all, even though the alliance looked quite powerful because there were many people and there were many opinions, they could not be united. As such, they could not display their strength. If they were an entire faction, their strength would be quite terrifying. The Sun God faction was the most troublesome faction because the Pantheon Temple had formed an alliance with the surrounding factions and was right next to it. Originally, after the Sun God faction finished digesting the other faction, they would attack the surrounding factions. However, they had never thought that these factions would form an alliance so quickly and even pull in the Pantheon Temple, which had been in the limelight recently. Now that the Pantheon Temple had 7 billion people and 120 million soldiers, could they still defeat this alliance? This was almost impossible, so they could only stop expanding. Chapter 1903. The three sun gods did not want to sit still and wait for the alliance to wipe them out, so they gathered the important members of the faction to discuss. Damn it, we didn't offend that Pantheon, but he worked with other factions to deal with us. If we knew this would happen, we would have worked together to wipe him out. Now, we're being threatened by others. That's right. If it was the other factions, even though there are many of them, they're just a bunch of random people. We can wipe them out with some methods. Once we swallow their strength, Sun God faction will be the strongest here. It's useless to say all this now. Let's talk about how to deal with the current situation. If the alliance attacks, how should Sun God faction deal with it? That's right. The most important thing is how to face the alliance. If we wait any longer, the alliance might attack. I have a suggestion. Since the alliance has become the biggest faction here, others will be wary. If we invite other factions to resist the alliance, there should be factions that are safe and should join us. I agree with this suggestion. It's not bad, and it's the best solution. Sun God faction sent many messengers to the various factions to invite them to form an alliance to resist the Pantheon alliance and to overcome the threat of Pantheon. They said that for a small faction like Pantheon to become so terrifying, their ambition was obvious. If they did not resist, they would die sooner or later. Moreover, they pushed the death of the Sun God's son to Pantheon, which was to sow discord between the factions. Actually, Sun God faction still did not know why the Sun God's son would join that faction, but now they just had to throw all the blame on Pantheon. In the end, many factions wanted to join the alliance. Most of them were near Pantheon, and they did not want to attack anyone. They just wanted to protect themselves and not be wiped out. There were 19 factions that joined Sun God faction. They had 3 billion people and 100 million troops. Along with Sun God's 900 million people and 50 million troops, they had 2 billion people and 150 million troops. Sun God Alliance's strength completely exceeded Pantheon alliances and replaced Pantheon as the strongest faction here. Everyone was surprised. How did another super faction appear so quickly? Facing the current Sun God Alliance, everyone could not help but feel afraid. With such a faction joining, Sun God faction no longer feared Pantheon alliance. Not only did they have the strength to resist Pantheon, but they also had the power to attack Pantheon alliance. This time, Sun God did not hesitate. He gathered all the gods to destroy Pantheon alliance. They knew that Pantheon alliance was too dangerous and could not be allowed to continue, or they would definitely be defeated. However, even though Sun God was the alliance's name, Sun God could not decide the alliance, so they needed to gather. However, at the alliance conference, the Sun God proposed to attack the Pantheon, but many people objected, so the Sun God could only start to persuade them. Sun Goddess also reported this to Zhao Fu. After hearing about this, Zhao Fu's expression became quite serious, but he did not feel much fear. With the Pantheon Alliance's current strength, even if the Sun God Alliance attacked, the Pantheon Alliance would be able to defend. However, the Pantheon Temple was at a disadvantage, which was not a good thing. Actually, when Zhao Fu had established Pantheon Alliance, he had wanted to destroy Sun God faction because he was already a threat to Pantheon. Back then, Zhao Fu had suggested attacking the Sun God's faction, but the other godly spirits did not want to attack the Sun God's faction and only wanted to protect themselves. Otherwise, they would have been able to quickly attack and destroy the Sun God's faction. Now that Sun God had formed an alliance, it would be many times more difficult to destroy it. Instead, they would be threatened by it again. As Zhao Fu notified the various factions, he also tried to contact other factions to join the Pantheon Alliance to defend against the Sun God Alliance. Once the alliance was established, Zhao Fu could openly pull people into the alliance. The first one he pulled in was Star God faction. With it, Pantheon Alliance's strength was not much different from Sun God Alliance's. At this time, Zhao Fu also learned that many people in Sun God Alliance opposed attacking Pantheon Alliance. It seemed that Sun God could not control the alliance, so Pantheon Alliance did not need to resist anymore. The three Sun Gods were also angry. They were clearly a big faction, but they could not control it. Moreover, this was the best time to destroy Pantheon Palace. If they waited any longer, Pantheon Palace would only become more terrifying. They also explained the dangers of Pantheon, but others did not want to attack. They felt that the losses would be too great. In the end, the three Sun Gods could not do anything, so the plan to attack Pantheon could only end in failure. At this time, Zhao Fu continued to pull people into the alliance while recording those who did not want to join and investigating. The next day, Zhao Fu anxiously gathered all the gods. Everyone sat around a long table and started to discuss. Because Pantheon was the most powerful faction, Zhao Fu became the leader of the alliance, and the alliance was named after Pantheon. Zhao Fu sat at the top and took out a list of those who did not want to join Pantheon, as he said, "Before, we had 7 billion people and 120 million soldiers, while Sun God faction only had 900 million people and 50 million soldiers. If we had immediately sent out troops, we might have already destroyed Sun God's faction." A deity laughed dryly. That Sun God Temple's reaction is quite fast, forming a new alliance in an instant, possessing so many troops. Zhao Fu admitted that Sun God's faction had reacted quite quickly, but they might not have been able to destroy Sun God's faction. Zhao Fu did not continue on this topic and said, "You all know how big of a threat Sun God faction is, so there's no need to say anything else. The factions on this list are all factions that did not want to join Pantheon. It's very likely that these factions will join Sun God's faction, so for safety's sake, we need to destroy them as soon as possible. These factions' strength is average, and after conquering them, we'll split the resources evenly." The gods looked at these factions. With Pantheon's current strength, they would be able to crush them without suffering too many losses. Moreover, there would be good benefits, so they were not surprised and nodded in agreement. Chapter 1904. With the addition of the Star God faction, the Pantheon Alliance now had 4 billion people and 160 million soldiers. They were divided into 4 teams. each with 40 million soldiers. They did not have much of an advantage, so they split into 3 teams, each with 50 million soldiers, and attacked 3 factions at the same time. These 3 forces were not very strong. Their population was only about 100 million, and their soldiers were also about 10 million. Out of the 3 attacking teams, Pantheon would lead one team and Star God would lead another. Because these 2 factions were quite strong, they had the qualifications to do this within the alliance. The final team would be jointly led by a few factions. Zhao Fu led that team and quickly arrived in front of that faction. This faction had 2 gods who were male twins. Facing the Pantheon Alliance's attack, they could only desperately resist and ask for help from the Sun God Alliance. They understood that they were not a match for the Pantheon Alliance, so the only way was to ask for help from the Sun God faction. Not only did the Sun God Pantheon have the same strength as the Pantheon Alliance, but they also had enmity with each other. Perhaps the Sun God Alliance would help them. However, this was not the case. After finding out that the Pantheon Alliance was attacking the surrounding factions, the Sun God wanted to attack Pantheon to delay their attack and disrupt their plans. However, the alliance was not something that it could do alone. The other factions felt that they would suffer great losses, so they did not want to attack. As such, the Sun God faction could only give up. However, the Sun God also understood the Pantheon Alliance's plan, so he gathered the various gods to discuss and also made the decision to attack some of the weaker factions around them. Because they would be able to suppress the other side with their strength and obtain many benefits, the other factions did not object. They happily started to attack the surrounding factions without any worries. Looking back at the Pantheon battlefield, Zhao Fu quickly gave the order to attack. The Alliance army gave off a massive aura as it ferociously rushed towards the city walls like a flood. Swish, 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 arrows shot out from the city walls, bringing with them waves of energy as they flew out, forming a terrifying wave of arrows that covered countless Alliance soldiers before descending like a torrential rain. On the Alliance's side, countless auras were released. The auras condensed in the air, forming a huge shield that blocked the countless arrows. The Alliance army continued to rush towards the city walls. Boom! A massive aura spread out as countless runes appeared on the city walls. The runes flickered with a strange light, and a massive energy barrier appeared, covering the city walls. However, the shields formed by the Alliance army spread out and formed different behemoths. There were creatures like pigs, cows, and snakes, and weapons like swords, and spears. All sorts of massive creatures gave off faint lights and gave off powerful auras as they floated in the air. The power they gave off caused people's bodies to feel a chill, and it caused clouds to swirl, creating a shocking scene. Boom, boom, boom. Countless massive creatures gave off terrifying power and ferocious auras as they quickly smashed against the defensive barrier. Gusts of strong wind spread out. After withstanding so much terrifying power, the barrier immediately cracked, and with a bang, it turned into countless fragments and scattered. The Alliance army also rushed to the bottom of the city wall and officially began the siege. They took out ladders, flying locks, and various other tools and started to climb up the city wall. They also shot arrows at the city wall. The soldiers defending the city wall also did their best to fight back, shooting all sorts of arrows and using heavy objects to smash the Alliance soldiers. However, the Alliance soldiers quickly reached the top of the city wall and started to fight with the soldiers on the city wall. A soldier on the city wall held a bow and shot out an arrow, piercing through an Alliance soldier's body. A soldier on the city wall slashed out with an axe and sent a soldier flying, but he was quickly killed by the Alliance soldiers. An Alliance soldier held a spear and vigorously stabbed out, piercing through a soldier's body. Another Alliance soldier slashed out with his saber and sent a soldier flying, while another Alliance soldier stabbed out with his sword and stabbed into a soldier's throat. The Alliance soldiers used their advantage in numbers to quickly suppress the soldiers on the city wall. Even though the soldiers were still resisting, they had already lost and could only put up a final struggle. In the sky, The godly spirits beside Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile as they exploded out with powerful auras and rushed at the two Gemini godly spirits. The Gemini godly spirits could only explode out with their auras to resist. The two sides started an intense battle, and powerful shockwaves spread out, forming wild gales that caused the weather to change. As for Zhao Fu, he did not do anything because there was no need for him to do anything. A while later, the two Gemini godly spirits were killed by the other godly spirits, and the soldiers on the city wall started to run in all directions. The Alliance army charged in and started to conquer region after region, and soon they had conquered all of the territory. The godly spirits next to Zhao Fu happily smiled. They had not suffered many losses in this battle, and after conquering such a faction, they would be able to obtain great benefits after splitting the spoils. A godly spirit said with a smile, "God Lord, what should we do next?" The other godly spirits looked at Zhao Fu. Zhao Fu gave a trace of a smile as he said, "Continue to attack the surrounding factions as quickly as possible and don't give them any time to react. Otherwise, once they react, they will band together to stop us. As such, we need to obtain the greatest benefits during this time." The godly spirits nodded seriously and continued to attack the other factions. Roughly 2 days later, the two massive alliances unrestrainedly attacked the surrounding factions like ferocious beasts, causing the countless factions to feel incredibly terrified. They had no choice but to ally together to defend against the attacks of the two factions. In the end, the two alliances stopped their attacks. During those 2 days, the Pantheon Alliance took down 12 factions and obtained 800 million or so people, as well as other cities and countless resources. This was quite a good harvest. The Sun God Alliance took down 9 factions and obtained 600 million or so people. They also obtained many resources and cities, but their gains were quite average. However, even though 1 billion people seemed like a lot, they had to be split evenly, so the Pantheon Alliance and Sun God Alliance did not obtain many people. What was worth mentioning was that of the two new alliances, one was the Night God Alliance led by the Night God, while the other was the Ice God Alliance led by the Ice God. The strength of these two factions was about the same as the Pantheon Alliance. They had 2 billion or so people and hundreds of millions of soldiers. Chapter 1905. There were no longer any independent powers because independent powers like that had long since been destroyed by others, no longer existing. In order to protect themselves, the various factions could only join different alliances, which was why the world was split into 4. Moreover, the 4 alliances continuously strengthened their defenses and had all sorts of soldiers to quickly increase their defenses and power to defend against the other alliances. Moreover, in order to celebrate their gains, the Sun God Alliance and Pantheon Alliance held a banquet in their chambers. There was no need to worry about the Sun God Alliance. The Pantheon Alliance was celebrating in the Pantheon Alliance. Zhao Fu had specially prepared all sorts of food and wine to entertain the various godly spirits, especially the wine. The wine was not ordinary at all, and even though it was not very harmful, godly spirits would easily get drunk if they drank it. Zhao Fu sat at the top of the banquet and raised a cup of wine as he smiled and said loudly, "In order to celebrate our victory, I propose a toast to everyone. Today, no one will leave until they are drunk." After saying this, Zhao Fu downed the wine in his cup in one gulp. The other godly spirits at the other tables all smiled and raised their cups to toast Zhao Fu. "This is all thanks to your help, God Lord. Not only did you not threaten us, but you also allowed us to obtain all sorts of benefits. I should have allied with Pantheon earlier. That's right. God Lord has treated us so well that we have long since joined the Alliance. In the future, Pantheon will be our best ally. Everything is thanks to Pantheon's help, so we should properly thank Pantheon. Today, I promise that I will be one of Pantheon's greatest supporters. In the future, if Pantheon needs anything, I will definitely help." I agree. Everyone, let's toast God Lord. Following this, the godly spirits started to drink, and the scene was quite lively. Zhao Fu continuously toasted the various godly spirits. However, even though Zhao Fu also drank, with his powerful power and bloodline, the wine did not affect Zhao Fu at all. After the banquet ended, some of the more powerful godly spirits were still sober, some of the intermediate godly spirits were somewhat drunk, and some of the weaker godly spirits were already drunk. The various godly spirits brought their people back to their factions, and Zhao Fu did not stop them and allowed them to leave. He inwardly gave a trace of a cold smile. He had long since come up with a plan. However, at this time, Zhao Fu noticed that there was a deity with a red face. He walked drunkenly to the other side of the Pantheon Palace. This godly spirit was a male godly spirit. He was 8 meters tall and had long purple hair. He was quite handsome and gave off a noble aura. Within an alleyway, the violet-haired godly spirit gave a trace of an evil smile as she stretched out her hand to stop a white-robed woman with a slim figure and a trace of a pure aura. She was one of the 4 female priests appointed by Zhao Fu, and her name was Shangling Er. Seeing the godly spirit stopping her, she respectfully bowed and said softly, "Greetings, godly spirit. Why are you stopping me?" The purple-haired divinity had been keeping an eye on Shangling Er at the banquet because Shangling Er was his type. Usually, when he was in his own faction, he did not have many restrictions. Thinking that he was a deity, it was impossible for the Pantheon Palace to reject him if he asked for a little priestess. Therefore, with a hint of drunkenness, he directly stopped Shangling. The violet-haired, godly spirit gave a trace of an evil smile as he said, "I've taken a liking to you. Serve me tonight and tomorrow morning. I'll take you back to my faction. I'll give you anything you want." Shangling looked troubled as she said, "Lord, godly spirit, I'm a priest of the Pantheon Palace, not a woman like you think. Besides, even if I have to serve, I should serve our Lord God." The violet-haired, godly spirit gave a trace of smile as he looked at Shangling body and walked over as he said, "You need to know that I'm a godly spirit. Your godly lord is so nice. If I ask him for a woman, he'll definitely let me play with her." Shangling retreated in fear and said angrily, "Lord, godly spirit, please have some dignity. If the godly lord gave me to you, I have to get the godly lord's orders." The purple-haired divinity laughed out loud and went up to hug Shangling. "Let me finish tasting your body first. It won't be too late to talk to your divine master after that." Shangling struggled with all her might. Although she had obtained the power of 10,000 deities and become a priestess, the time was too short. She was no match for the deity in front of her. The violet-haired, godly spirit hugged Shangling body and came close to Shangling face and lightly sniffed. Shangling body gave off an enchanting aura and gave off a trace of delight. "I didn't expect you to still be a virgin. It seems that there are quite a lot of female gods under your pantheon, and all of them are so beautiful. I heard that your god lord often uses special methods to play with their bodies. Tell me how to prove it, and I will try it on you today." Shangling shouted angrily, "Lord God, let go of me, or else I'll really get angry and call for help. Please don't slander our Lord God. He's not that kind of person." The purple-haired, godly spirit laughed evilly. "I've already set up a barrier here. Even if you scream, it's useless. Also, your godly master is that kind of person. In my experience, your godly master has played with thousands of women." Hearing that there was a barrier, Shangling face became quite pale. Hearing the purple-haired, godly spirit call her godly lord, she said angrily, "Even if our godly lord is like that, us priestesses should serve him, not a godly spirit like you." Hearing this, the violet-haired, godly spirit felt quite angry and pushed Shanglong against the wall before grabbing her arm and pressing her against the wall. He gave a trace of a savage smile as he said, "Even if you're his woman, I'll play with you for a bit." "What can he do? You think you can kill me?" Shangling looked at the violet-haired, godly spirit with her beautiful eyes and said angrily, "If you dare to do anything to me, I'm sure the godly master won't let you off." The violet-haired, godly spirit gave a disdainful smile and did not intend to continue. He grabbed Xiangling Heir's clothes and vigorously pulled them off, revealing her white and alluring body to the violet-haired godly spirit. Looking at this alluring body, the violet-haired godly spirit could not help but give off a lewd and evil look, and he eagerly started to do it with Xiangling Heir. Xiangling Heir twisted her body and continuously struggled, feeling despair within her heart, and tears continuously flowed out of her eyes. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.